Good morning, everyone. This time it's 9 o'clock. We'll call the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors to order. Everybody take their seat, please. At this time, we'll have the invocation by Chaplain Kevin Hankey from the Transport for Christ. Everybody stand, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
I read on a newspaper that the biggest insurer may quit Obamacare, and that affects my wife because she works for United Healthcare. And then I was looking at the newspaper, and the number of displaced people is nearly tripled in 10 years, is like 55 million. Syria, Lebanon, South Africa, Malaysia, United States. And I wanted to share with you an invocation, a blessing from Romans. It says, "The whole creation has been groaning as in pains of childbirth right up to the present time." I have friends who are veterans who say that there's 22 vets who commit suicide every day, and 1 in 6 vets are homeless. And yet we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And here's the doxology from Romans. "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." And I wanted to share with you one other doxology or blessing from the book of Jude. If you had to choose one passage from my life, it would be merciful to those who doubt. I work with a lot of people who have addictions, and you have to have grace, and you have to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. So be merciful to those who doubt. That's Jude 22. It's easy to remember. It's like Catch 22. When you want to judge somebody, Mother Teresa says, if you're going to judge them, then you can't love them. And Jude 24 is another benediction. "To him who is able to keep you from falling, and to present you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy, to the only God, our Savior, be glory, majesty, power, and authority, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen." May your session be blessed today. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you for being here. Will you all join me in a pledge of allegiance now, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Cindy will have roll call. We have 2 people missing today, and I believe Judy was accused. I didn't hear from Chris. So. Okay. So at this time, we're open for public comment. Anybody can be on or off the agenda. If anybody from the public wants to talk at this time. And we're open for public comment on or off the agenda. And I will say it one more time. We're open for public comment at this time, on or off the agenda. Evidently, we don't have any, so we'll move on. Thank you. We have the consent agenda, minutes from a previous meeting, November 3rd. Our next meeting is January 5th. And do I have a motion to accept? Supervisor Babbitt, I have a second. Supervisor Brinkman. Is there any discussion? We have a motion and a second. Any corrections or additions to anything in the minutes? If not, we will vote on it then if there's no discussion. And that was unanimous. Thank you. We'll go into the presentations, and I'll turn it over to the administrator, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to introduce Bill Rubin, the Economic Development Corporation Executive Director, and he will make the introduction of Dr. Kelly. Morning, Bill.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Bill.
An ongoing work product of St. Croix EDC is its monthly St. Croix Valley Economic Dashboard. What is that? Well, the dashboard presents the latest available data in a convenient four-page document. Now, that information had been floating out there prior to our launch of the dashboard. We just simply chose back in the day to put it into a convenient four-page document. The dashboard covers 7 counties. 4 of them are in Wisconsin: St. Croix, Polk, Pierce, and Dunn, and 3 in Minnesota: Chisago, Ramsey, and Washington counties. Dr. Logan Kelly is an associate professor of economics at UW River Falls at the College of Business and Economics. He's also the director of the Center for Economic Research on campus, and it's through that work at the Center for Economic Research that the dashboard was launched a couple of years ago. He's the chief author of the dashboard, and he's here today to provide the county board with his observations and comments on the November edition of the St. Croix Valley Economic Dashboard. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Logan Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Let's see. Oh, as Bill said, I am Logan Kelly. I am the director of the Center for Economic Research which is a part of the College of Business and Economics at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. Before I begin, I'd like to tell you just a few things about the center and what we do. Essentially, we are one of the main outreach arms, or one of several outreach arms of the College of Business and Economics to the community, both to public policymakers as well as business leaders. We try to, at the center, identify research projects similar to the dashboard that help promote economic activity and economic development. We try to publish fairly regular economic analysis on the local area. It's oftentimes much easier to find information about the national conditions than it is about our regional conditions. And then finally, provide consulting services both for policymakers, public authorities, and private businesses, as well as other community members and nonprofits. The dashboard is published monthly and basically gives us a snapshot of what's available. Now, there's a few things that I should point out as far as regional data goes. Data is always released with a lag. And at the regional level, that lag's actually fairly significant. So we, on average, deal with about a 2-month lag in what's available for most of the data points. Some of it's a little bit farther. So you'll see a lot of data talking about October in the November dashboard. Well, that comes from this data lag that we have. So if we get started, hopefully that's big enough to read. I've tried to condense essentially the national conditions into one slide to give us some context. Generally speaking, I look at this slide and say, yeah, that's kind of boring, which frankly, when you hear a macroeconomist talk about the economy, when he says it's boring, that's generally a good thing. When a macroeconomist starts to be kind of interested in what's going on, it's usually things are bad. But generally speaking, we're seeing fairly strong growth, or at least consistent growth. Overall, real GDP for the third quarter was a bit short of what I'd like to see. I really like to see that 3% level as far as that kind of that over 3%, we're going to reduce unemployment rate. Under 3%. Between 2 and 3, we're going to kind of stay fairly constant. But if we dig into the numbers a little deeper, we see a couple of things in there that give us, well, one, a little pause for concern, and one, it's mixed. Consumption remains strong. Consumption makes up about 70% of GDP. And particularly in the third quarter going into the fourth quarter, seeing strong consumption numbers are fairly encouraging. Investments off. However, investments, this is actually business spending, is highly volatile. It's much more volatile than the rest of, than consumption or the rest of GDP. And so one data point doesn't make us worry as much. So overall, we're looking at reasonably consistent growth. That translates through the rest of the indicators. One of the big things that's on everybody's mind currently is what's the Fed going to do at its next meeting? And everybody's a little bit in a quandary because the Fed has announced that it's planning to raise rates. But I think we need to put that into context. First of all, the current data shows no inflationary pressures at the national level whatsoever. Essentially, the consumer price index is nil, and other price indices that are a little more forward-looking actually almost look negative. So we have no inflationary pressures. So why is the Fed talking about raising rates? Well, to put in context the rate that they're talking about, if I were guessing, I would not expect a rate more than 0.5%, and that would be surprisingly big jump. I would expect it to go to 0.25%. It's currently, their current targets or de facto target for the Fed funds rate is about 0.12%. So we're talking a very, very minuscule change. Most of this change is psychological, and most of this change is dealing with the fact that they're worried about what inflationary pressures are going to look like in 2 to 2.5 years from now. Job creation has been steady and consistent throughout the year nationally. And that gives us our context. Basically, within the national economy, we have had reasonably steady growth. Not big, not huge, not booming, but reasonably steady growth throughout the year. Put that into the context of Minnesota and Wisconsin. This data is actually produced by the Philadelphia Fed. It's called a leading and coincident indicator of economic activity within the state. They produce this because actual measures of economic activity at the state level are only available annually, and they're usually available with about a 6 to 18 month delay, depending on what time of the year you're at. So it's not the most useful data when we look at GDP measured at the state level. They put this in here. The one to really look at is this leading indicator. This leading index essentially is a prediction or a forecast of growth within the state over the next 6 months. So in Minnesota, they're projecting a growth, at least in October, which was the latest release, of about 0.65%, and within Wisconsin, about 1.26%. Now, to put that into context of the national data, which is usually annualized, roughly speaking, multiply that by 2 to get an annual figure, because this is a semi-annual number, which basically says Wisconsin is reasonably on track with the national picture, at least as of October. This state leading index can be a little bit volatile, but over the last year, it's ranged somewhere between 1% and 3%. which if you double that is a fair amount of variability, but still has suggested reasonable amount of growth throughout the year. Unemployment rates are actually quite interesting within the state, particularly within this region. If we compare Minnesota and Wisconsin, we have both are below the national average of about 5%. And what's more interesting, if we look at the St. Croix Valley area, every county in the St. Croix Valley area is actually below its state average. And some of them quite considerably below, particularly if we look at St. Croix County, which has had fairly strong, particularly strong performance within its labor market. If we take this as a region, and this is a rough aggregation over the entire region, we see the same basic trend that unemployment regionally has been below both the Wisconsin and Minnesota averages, which tends to indicate that we're actually sitting in one of the main economic drivers of this part of the world, which is no great news. I mean, we have the Twin Cities, which have a number of industries and very large corporations located there, but we can see, well, it's not for naught that St. Croix County is one of the fastest growing counties in Wisconsin. Comparing by sector within October, we can see across the board in Wisconsin we've had gains. I've been a bit critical of some of the growth that we've seen over the past few years in Wisconsin, essentially trading higher paying jobs for lower paying jobs. That seems to, at least in the second half of 2015, reverse slightly, and we're starting to see more across the board growth in employment. Wisconsin, or Minnesota, on the other hand, has stayed a little more constant in the last few months of the year, particularly in these last 2 or 3. So it goes up and down by very, very small amounts. Looking at Minnesota job creation that follows, we can see that overall job growth has pretty much leveled out as of, say, May or June, and stayed pretty consistent through the rest of the year. Wisconsin, on the other hand, well, Wisconsin had a rough first half of the year, but the second half of the year, basically from June on, has seen some fairly significant improvement. So we've seen quite a bit of job growth, particularly in this last part of the year. This is all going right along with the national trend of essentially almost emerging from a recovery phase of the business cycle into an expansionary phase. So maybe just beginning to edge up above long-run trend in actual GDP. Now taking a look at this at the MSA, so looking at the Twin Cities. Now the Twin Cities MSA includes parts of St. Croix and Pierce counties. Not quite all of them. All of Hudson will be included in the MSA, but it's that western kind of half of the counties that are included there. We can see very, very steady job growth throughout the year. We can also see that the cities are clearly a very large contributor to the improvement in the employment situation throughout both states.
Question.
Yes?
Is there a way to look at that data as it pertains, taking out the influence of the Twin Cities and just looking at St. Croix County employment rate without that influence?
We can look at St. Croix County. Looking at that without the influence of the city would be
Difficult?
It would be difficult. There's two different statistics we can look at when we look at employment data, essentially two different surveys. Roughly speaking, we have the household survey and the employer's survey. So if we look at total non-farm employment, that comes from the employer's survey, which means where the job is counted is where the job actually is, so where the employer is. So if we have a job actually happening in St. Croix County, that would necessarily show up in total non-farm employment. On the other hand, if we look at the household survey, which is where, for example, the unemployment rate is calculated from, that's actually a survey of households or people, so it's where you live. So there you could have people working in the cities who live in Hudson, and they're counted as employed. So that would be counted as one of a number called employment, which is actually a little bit confusing the way they label it. So the one from the household survey is called employment or total employment. The one from the employer survey is called total non-farm employment. There's issues with both numbers. For one, agriculture is a fairly large part of our economy here, so why do we leave out farms? Well, it's a little more serious than that. Actually, what we're doing is we're leaving out all small sole proprietor type businesses. Essentially, you're leaving out businesses that the BLS doesn't know exist. So that's a problem with the employer survey. But that can get at what jobs are actually in the county, which we do report. That actually isn't available down to the county level, though. The only thing that's available down to the county level is that household survey. It's actually kind of fun. I had the city of River Falls contacted me and wanted to find out this for River Falls, which is even a bigger challenge because it splits 2 counties. So that is quite challenging. But the final answer to that, sorry, long answer, is the cities are entwined with the economy. So we have a number of people who work in Hudson, or who live in Hudson work in the cities, who live in St. Croix live in the cities, New Richmond, and in other areas within St. Croix County who work in the cities. Well, that income then comes in and has an impact on the local economy. How do we parse that out? That would be a very challenging task to do. Right. So looking at agricultural prices, as of October, actually as of October, if you look at a few of the things, and I'm not an agricultural economist, so I'm a little out of my depth there, but the overall, things seem to be going well this season. We've had a very long season, a very mild harvest season, which seems to have boded well for agricultural markets, at least up into the writing of this report, which was the first week of November. On top of that, we're seeing milk prices are down just a little bit year over year. And the price of a cow is down just a little bit year over year. As per usual, price of a cow in Wisconsin is just slightly higher than that of in Minnesota, which is very, very typical. We can see both milk price and milk volume over the year for both Wisconsin and Minnesota. Milk price has been reasonably steady throughout most of 2015. And volume has been up just a little bit overall. These are the bars are monthly volume of milk produced in terms of millions of pounds. And you can see Wisconsin, of course, produces a bit more than, well, everybody else. Coming back to your question when we're talking about the actual local employment conditions, this is the employment level by county. Now, again, this comes from that household survey. So it really this really counts jobs based on where employees live rather than where they work. Unfortunately, total non-farm employment isn't measured down to the county level, at least not on a monthly basis. There's another survey that does this on a quarterly basis where we can get a little more information at the county level. But on a monthly basis, we're stuck with the stuff from the household survey, excuse me. And we can see overall employment levels are up across almost the entire county. This is a good sign. I get a little nervous when we start just talking about unemployment rates, because you can ask the question, what happens if the unemployment rate goes down? Is that good or bad? Well, the answer is, well, why did it go down? If it went down because everybody decided they just couldn't find a job and left the workforce, well, that's not good. So it's good to look at these components. Seeing employment up is a strong sign. It's also feeding into this idea that, well, the region is doing just a little bit better on average than the average for the states. Employment level, looking at Wisconsin versus Minnesota, it's up over the last 2 or 3 months in the year. Within the region, we've seen a little bit of decrease month over month. We're still showing an increase year over year. The next component to this is the labor force, and the unemployment rate is simply employment level divided by the labor force. We're seeing overall a little bit better performance maybe on the Minnesota side than we are on the Wisconsin side. It's a little more mixed. However, St. Croix County is still strong. It's still growing slightly year over year. Now, this means that what this means is basically we can kind of trust that unemployment rate. So the labor force has increased a little bit, but employment has increased more. So we like the fact that that has decreased. It's showing that we're having a fairly stable, pretty close to recovered job market within the county. And there's, of course, a graphical version of labor force. Then we finally need to talk just a little bit about the housing market. Now, the housing market seems to have recovered reasonably significantly. Now, the first thing I have to do, though, is define what I mean by recovery. And if what you mean by recovery is return to prices we saw before pre-housing market collapse, that's clearly not what I mean. Those were actually an inflated price that was a result of an asset bubble. And so I don't see us going in real terms back to that same value. Now, we may nominally be moved there as price level increases because housing cost tends to track very closely with price level. But what I do mean is, number one, inventories have been pretty significantly reduced. So what I'm showing here is data from talking about actually home listings. And it looks a little bleak if you just look at it off the cuff. But actually, it's quite encouraging. What these are is number of homes listed, not number of homes sold. And we have median home listing price. And so I did a quick calculation. This data is only available for Wisconsin. It's not available for Minnesota as far as prices of homes sold. But I did a quick look. As of October, this is November data, but October data is the latest I have for home sales. There's approximately 53%. The ratio of number of homes sold to number of homes listed in October was about 53%. Now, that compares to a year ago, October, where it was about 19%. So in both years, we had a similar number sold. So about 126 sold in October this year, about 142 sold this year, last year. But last year in October, we had 747 properties listed on the market for St. Croix County. So we've worked through a considerable amount of inventory. Another issue that I look at when we look at price, and I want to basically compare median home sale price to median home listing price. And in October of this year, median home listing price was around $225,000, where the home sale price was around $207,000. So basically, the sale price was about 92% of the median listing price, as opposed to a year ago, where it was about 74% of the listing price. So essentially, we see two things. Number one, the amount of inventory has come back down to a more normal, sustainable level. So that's a good thing. Number two, the actual price of homes has come down to a point where it's a little more in line with what the actual market expectations for getting those homes sold would be. So basically, those two things are what I classify as housing market recovery, not necessarily an increase in housing market values like we saw in the early part of the 2000s, but where we have an actual, a less of a disconnect between what sellers expect to receive for their homes and what buyers would want to pay for those homes. Then finally, taking a look at this nationally, looking at a little more accurate measure of home prices. One of the problems with looking at median home price is Well, it doesn't account for the different types of housing that are available. So I could sell one house that's a 1,200 square foot, 1 bedroom, 1 bath home, or I could sell one house that's a 25,000 square foot, 25 bedroom, ridiculous number of bathroom home, right? Those two would be different houses entirely. And so the one very, very large home might skew that median. Well, what these indices do is they try to account for that difference in quality so that we're comparing apples and apples. Overall, if once we do that, given the latest data, we're seeing reasonable appreciation in home prices, basically what we would expect, something in line with overall price level, maybe just a little bit ahead of that in our area. All right, and final thing to talk about a little bit, we talked about this before a bit, was interest rates. Interest rates are still quite low. I don't expect that to change very much after the Fed's meeting in December. At most, I would expect to see maybe these go up by 50 basis points at a maximum over the course of the next couple of months. I'd be surprised to see them move much faster than that. And that kind of concludes my wrap-up of local economic conditions. Not the most exciting of reports, but that's actually a good thing when we talk about the economy.
Are there any questions? Supervisor Ring?
So I think you touched on it a little bit, but there's, nationally there's this movement toward microeconomies, and maybe that's not the right word for it, like the Airbnbs and Ubers and this kind of maybe not off the grid kind of employment. And so it struck me when you said non-farm income is not only talking about non-farm, it's talking about other. So I'd like to know what else is that, and what is the impact, or is there any information on it? And then a second question is median income. Do you have any information on that? I understand for a long time that was going down. Do you have any information on that?
I need to check. Let me check to see what I can find on median income for at the county level. Actually, I just got a notification from the Bureau of Economic Analysis that personal consumption expenditure, the C in the consumption in real GDP, was just released for the state level. The last state release was just released this morning. So let me double check on trying to get a little more local than the state. Obviously, it's available at the state with a bit of a lag, but I think you'd like it a little more local than that. Do what? Trend. Oh, well, yeah, of course, the data points for that. It's a little more challenging to find some of that data down to the county level. But I'll see what I can find and get back to you with that. As far as talking about the employer survey, there's actually there's new economy problems with that, right? And forgive me, that goes back to my undergraduate days when we were in the .com boom and everybody was talking about new economy. But what I mean by new economy for right now is things like Uber. These essentially, we'll call them 1099 employees because they are essentially self-employed. Gig work is sometimes what it's referred to. That's very, very hard to track. Particularly within these surveys. But there's also old economy type issues with it as well. Because essentially for the BLS and BEA to assess this information, they have to actually know that the organization exists. So this actually is brought up when we were at business cycle turning points. So particularly when we're at the trough or the low point of a recession, and we're starting to move back into recovery, total non-farm employment tends to miss a bunch of employment because we have new firms being developed. So this problem of new firms is not limited just to these what we call gig employees or 1099 employees. However, the solution might come out of the technology that's being used, because we have Uber, that's all online, that's being recorded. These online type Airbnb, that's online, that's being recorded. At some point, it may be possible to start tapping into that data. To my knowledge, we haven't done that yet, though.
Supervisor Schoberg, you had a question? Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to Administrator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple recognitions this morning, and then we have a couple sets of appointments as well. The first recognition is for, and all of the recognitions this morning, and then Chad Wolski, the Child Support Director, is also going to have a few during his annual report, is really a recognition of a lot of teamwork and a lot of work by groups of staff that have come together on a very specific project and has made significant improvements to the way we do business in those respective areas. The first recognition is for the team that worked on the development of the new intranet for St. Croix County. I'm going to ask John Allegro, the Director of IT, to come up and say a few words about this project, and then we will recognize the staff that have been involved in that project.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Good morning. In an effort to improve internal communications at St. Croix County, I was tasked with putting together a team to replace the current intranet. My first selection, I didn't have to go very far. Annette Massey had been working with the county for about 20 years now, more than 20 years at this point, and she was the go-to person in IT for the existing intranet. Together we selected a vendor and strategic team members based on the needs of the county and the contributions and experience that we felt they would bring to the team. The result of that effort was the SharePoint strategic team, which we are recognizing today. When we established this team in March, I had no idea how effective it would be. We all have extremely tight schedules and demanding workloads. It was a challenge to meet the deadlines of the project and the constraints of the aggressive timeline, but we did it, and we should all be proud of that. We're spread out around the room here. The bridge went live on October 5th, 2015, thanks to the combined efforts of many people, including team members from many departments, including finance, facilities, IT, corporation counsel, administration, and human resources. In addition to the strategic team, there were many others who were responsible for the success of the project, including the content contributors and the entire IT department. And although they are not being formally recognized today, they are deserving of recognition for their contributions, and I would like to personally thank all of you for participating in that team. So we have Annette Massey, Elizabeth Roll, I don't see her in the room. Renee Peterson, Monica Luck, Kristen Ziliak, and Colleen Cron.
And we'll make sure Liz Roll gets hers. In fact, I'll give it to you, Scott. The next recognition is for another significant achievement based on some significant teamwork in the Health and Human Services Department. And the project lead on this, I believe, was Steve Kurt, who is the operations manager with the Health and Human Services Department. I'd call on Steve to say a few words about the project, and then we'll hand out some certificates. Steve?
Thank you. Welcome, Steve.
Morning. It's never a good idea to disagree with your administrator, but I will say that in terms of being a project lead, really this was shared by all of us. Kim Dupre, who was our IT representative, really led us through this process in a large way, and each one of the staff that participated led their department forward. And what we did is we had a group of managers that were involved with the EHR in their departments, work with what we called super users, who were staff that worked with other staff. And so they helped us develop the EHR, and then they also went back and tested what we developed with their staff groups and brought that information forward for further refinement. And then finally, after we got the EHR to a point where we were ready to look at implementation, they trained the staff. So in a lot of ways, those are the real leaders of the group, and I really think that they deserve a large share of the respect and commendation for this process. It started in 2013. There were some delays in the process because this became a much bigger process. As Ron can testify, it involved the whole state because there were certain things that we had to coordinate with other counties. But within St. Croix County, we moved forward as best we could only because of the group we had together in doing that. So Pat's got the names and we'll give the recognition. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to hand them out
Sure.
as I call them off? First of all, we have Kim Dupre, Kathy Houston, Julie Krings, Tammy Wilson. Several couldn't be here this morning. Steve Kurt, of course. Faye Stranke. Andrew Grant. Dave Hipsch. Don Campbell. Janine Seifert. Jenna Clark. Sarah Van Driel. Jenny Bowers, Jesse Sturba, Judy Fall, Kristen Depre, Kristen Newton, Lisa Whalen, Nancy Peabody, Pam Estes. Did I miss anyone, Steve?
Yes, Nicole Sini was also part of the group.
Okay. Okay, we'll make sure we get the certificate. Thank you, Nicole. And of course, Liz Roll.
Well, she was part of the other,
Oh,
the last.
okay, you took it. Okay, thanks. Thank you. A lot of good teamwork there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. On the, you're going to handle the appointments. We have to skip the first appointment until we go through some resolutions. So you can handle number
Okay.
2.
All right, thank you. Well, this is gives me great pleasure to make this appointment, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce to the board Ms. Heather Murray. Come on up, Heather. It pleases me to recommend to the board the appointment of Heather Murray as the St. Croix County Human Resources Director. Several months ago, we initiated a nationwide recruitment. We did the recruitment internally. After asking for proposals from executive search firms, the administration and the administration committee made the decision to conduct the recruitment internally with our own staff, which we did. So we began that process. We developed a job profile and began the process of a nationwide recruitment. We had over 70 applications from across the country for the position. The staff narrowed that group of 70 applications down to 10 semifinal candidates. We, as a staff and members of the administration committee, Supervisor Schochner, Supervisor Berkey, Chair Larson, were all involved in the first and second interview process, along with several staff people. As I said, we narrowed the initial group of over 70 down to 10. We conducted first round interviews. From there, we narrowed the group down to a group of 4 finalists, which we again conducted second round interviews with. And it became apparent to the selection committee that we had a fine candidate, well qualified in one of our neighboring counties, Eau Claire County. Heather Murray has served as the personnel officer and human resources director, has been employed with Eau Claire County for approximately 10 years in both of those capacities. And prior to her employment with St. Croix County, Heather was employed by Menards Incorporated for several years in several different HR positions. So I'd like to recommend wholeheartedly your support for the appointment of Heather Murray as our new Human Resources Director. And at this point, maybe ask Heather, put her on the spot. I didn't tell her I was going to do this, but maybe just say a few words to the board.
Really didn't tell me, so thank you for your time. Well, first of all, I do want to thank the entire selection committee for their time. This opportunity is one that I'm very excited about, and do hope that you confirm my appointment. I'm excited to start at St. Croix County and really work with the human resources team to move things in a positive direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. At this time, I'll look for a motion. Supervisor Schottner, second. Supervisor Schoberg. Is there any questions or discussion? If there is none, I'll call the vote. Unanimous. Thank you, Heather. Weather. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, members of the board. Heather's official start date with the county will be December 29th. She has to provide a 30-day notice to her employer, in which she has done. Even though she hasn't, her official start date is the 29th, she's actually now going to go into the administration suite and conduct interviews for the human resources generalist position. So we've already put her to work. So thank you, Heather. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And we'll move forward now with our annual department reports. District Attorney and Victim Witness. Eric Johnson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I've been told to keep this short, so I will. I'm just going to talk about a few things, and then I'll open up to questions, and then I'm going to have Ed Minzer talk. I believe he's been requested to talk a little bit about the drug issues in St. Croix County. So correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's got some time on that. I'm going to, rather than talk about numbers and that type of thing, our numbers, our crime stats are fairly consistent over the last few years, but of course, we've seen some increase in some of our drug cases. But one thing I want to talk about is our diversion program. I think that needs to be highlighted in this county. We've got one of the best diversion programs for a mid-level county in the area or in the state. And some of the things we're doing there is truly, I think, innovative and creative. We have approximately 196 people in our diversion program. If they meet the qualifications, there's a variety of things they have to do, from community service to treatment to check-in. It's actually, some of the people that administer our diversion program actually mini probation agents sometimes, because the conditions that we'll put, if they don't comply, then they come back in court. and so it's meeting the needs of a lot of different areas of the criminal justice system, and I think we're out ahead of, if you hear about criminal justice now, the system is going towards, let's separate the bad guys from the good guys and make sure we don't put, or not the bad guys from the good guys, the bad guys from the knuckleheads, and make sure the knuckleheads don't go to prison, but the bad guys do, and the knuckleheads end up in some other type of, knuckleheads is a little strong. I'll think of another politically, I'll think of another politically correct word sometime here. But trying to figure out a way so we don't incarcerate and put those people in. And so I think, like I said, I think St. Croix County with our diversion program is ahead of the ball. And one of the things that I think that I'm real proud of is we're doing training for moral recognition therapy, MRT training. And the 3 people, including myself, have been trained in MRT methods. And basically it means you go through a 12 session, well, it can be longer because if you don't pass, it goes from 1 to 12, and if you don't pass, you have to start over. And they're small groups, and we have 3 of them. There's about 12 people in each group. They're run, or they're facilitated by our diversion people. And they're high-risk offenders. And the people they're provided to us through probation and parole. We have some people through the jail, but probation and parole are the primary source. And what I like about it is, and I've talked to quite a few people about, the scientific results show that this actually has an effect on recidivism. So these high-risk offenders go through this, and the numbers show that they're less likely to be involved in the system later on. And again, these are high-risk offenders, not the low-risk offenders that are in our diversion program. So again, we've been doing this for about a year now. The groups have gone very well. We're going to enter into a contract with probation, and they're going to pay us or they're going to pay the county, so we get some reimbursement on this for each of the people that are involved. But we've got over 30 people that I think if they complete this program, hopefully we won't see in the system, and these are high-risk offenders. Pierce County does this. Ron is also certified. He's gone through the MRT training to level 2, which is, we had something going on here recently. So I think that's something that's exciting, and that's something that we're doing that a lot of counties, at least a lot of mid-sized counties, aren't doing. And I think we've kind of taken a leadership. Pierce County does it, but I would agree St. Croix County, we're kind of taking up Ron, can I get you to agree on that? We're kind of taking, good. All right, if you agree,
I not only absolutely agree, but people should know that in the advanced training that I was at, our district attorney was there as well. And the amazement, the respect, and from the presenter, the teacher of it, that we would have a district attorney attend that type of training at that level is incredible. Eric Johnson here has not only supported it from an administrative level, but has actually been trained. And I don't know if you folks understand how rare that is in the state. I would dare guess he's the only district attorney that's been trained in cognitive skills. And to take that type of a hands-on approach to something that is this integral to kind of correcting the errors in thinking that's taking place with our criminal population is outstanding, amazing, and I think deserves a little bit of recognition. So I just say that with an immense amount of pride. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rod. Check is tomorrow. Is that close? So anyway, I'm very proud of that program. Extremely proud. I want to mention this is the last year of our Stop Drugs program. This is the 25th year we've done it. The DA's office has done it. We've collected about $250,000 over 25 years. We've had over 33,000 posters from kids in the county, and we've distributed 139,000 calendars. So those of you, I know a lot of you come in and judge and help. This is our last year. next Monday in New Richmond at 7 o'clock at the high school, we're having our last ceremony, our stop drug ceremony. We're having a ventriloquist come in. So, and we're paying, it's all funded by donations. None of this is taxpayer money. So if you're free, it should be kind of interesting. We're paying him a ton of dough. So we'll see how good he is. He's going to try to tailor his message to stop drug issues. Now, like I said, we've had guitar players, banjo players, dogs, football coaches. So we're ending with a ventriloquist. Finally, before I turn it over to Ed, I want to thank first of all, I want to thank you. I think being on a county board is a lot of time commitment, and if you ever go out and you say it's a thankless job, I'm going to dispel that right now because I'm thanking you, so you can no longer say it's a thank you for your time and service. Also, I've got a terrific staff, and that's why we can do a lot of things. I want to thank Kathy Halverson, Pam Bell-Richard, and Lisa Maltoff. Kathy is my office manager, Pam is the victim witness coordinator, and Lisa is our diversion coordinator. And all of them, not only besides helping run the office, have achieved a certain level of notoriety, positive notoriety, in their own positions. So I want to thank them publicly for all their work. And like I said, I think it was requested that we do a short presentation on some of the drug issues. Ed Minzer is our drug prosecutor here. I think there's an article, he's already introduced himself. He comes from La Crosse. He was a prosecutor there for 3 years. And he's going to give a short presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to Rick, too, for giving me an opportunity to speak with you here today. I guess I had been asked to talk a little bit about what is currently being done to address heroin and opiate problems, but I think generally as a whole we can talk about what the District Attorney's Office does to try and address these issues with serious drug abuse in the county. What I think we do very well, and I think a lot of people can do well, is the traditional role of the prosecution, of filing criminal cases, obtaining convictions. In 2014, we prosecuted 158 felony-level drug cases, and it's looking at the numbers this year. It's very likely that we will slightly be surpassing that number from last year. I anticipate that we will reach a number of filings slightly above that. 158 felony cases. We're seeing from the numbers a slight increase in the level of felony possessions. Those are things like possession of methamphetamine, possession of certain narcotic drugs, including heroin, as well as some possession of cocaine and even marijuana when people have prior convictions under Chapter 961 of the Wisconsin statutes, the drug chapter. I would say while methamphetamine continues to be the hard drug of choice among the users in St. Croix County, there is still a large portion of our users that are dabbling into opiates and heroin included. When we look at the numbers from last year, we had 15 drug trafficking charges as it related specifically to opiates that was included in those 158 felony filings. When we're talking about how the District Attorney's Office addresses the problem, really it's best to kind of think of it as two separate, distinct problems. You have the supply, or the trafficking in controlled substances, and the demand, those people who are users, who are addicts. So really when looking at the problem, you have to break it into two distinct areas. And as it relates to supply, our office does diligently attack these for-profit drug traffickers. These are the people that are making money off of the addicts that we have, the people that are suffering in our community with addiction problems. We prosecute them to the fullest and seek harsh penalties for those people who we identify as being the for-profit type drug dealers, believing that they should be punished harshly. We assist law enforcement. Typically how they go about their business with these cases are stings, or something called controlled buys, where law enforcement has a confidential informant who they provide with money that goes out in a controlled setting, as the name suggests, and buys drugs off the street so that we can prosecute the drug dealers. So we assist law enforcement in a couple of different ways. We help them with obtaining search warrants. We also assist in doing their seizures or their forfeitures of cash that they take off of these drug dealers and vehicles. This is a burden that is falling much more on the state at this time, as the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing much less of the legwork here. In the past, they had been doing a lot of our civil forfeitures for these areas. And what this does is this money can go back to the agencies, and they then can use part of those proceeds if they want to use them for future controlled buys, using that as the money that they use to collect, that they use in those controlled buys to buy drugs, or vehicles often. The agencies are allowed to use those vehicles as undercover cars for their sting operations, or they can sell those vehicles at auction for, again, where they can use the proceeds for additional law enforcement activities. Actually, it was just a couple of weeks ago, I finished up a civil trial for one of these forfeitures where we were able to forfeit over $2,200 worth of cash. Most of these are resolved along with the criminal cases. They don't often go to trial, but in some cases like this recent one, they do. And that falls on our office to be the one completing those forfeitures. There are some limitations to attacking the supply of the drugs that are coming into our community. Some of those limitations are inherent in what we're doing here. We can disrupt the flow of drugs that are coming in, but oftentimes once we get one of these drug dealers, somebody else steps up to try and take their place. Another limitation that we have is geographically where we're located. The biggest hub for the controlled substances that come into our community is the Twin Cities area. So jurisdictionally, we have some problems with our law enforcement being able to go over there and us being able to prosecute. So these are some inherent limitations to attacking the supply of drugs into our community. And we have to recognize that we're not going to solve these problems by prosecuting drug dealers alone. We understand that we need to address this issue of demand, these people in our community who are addicts, who are users. And we still need to do a lot of the same things. We need to file cases, we need to get convictions, but we take a slightly different approach to it where it's not harsh punishments that we're trying to seek out here. We're trying to focus more on rehabilitation, and that's what we're doing a lot of, and I think our office has done really well. I'll echo a lot of what Rick told you about our diversion program. It is an amazing resource for me as the drug prosecutor to have that at my fingertips, so I can put these individuals who might otherwise be convicted felons, I can put them through the diversion program, try and get them the help that they need to try and overcome this addiction, and then hopefully they will be more productive members of society. They will be able to avoid that felony conviction and be able to live productive lives. And the diversion does this. It's a program that's been in existence since 2005. More recently, in 2014, I received something called a TAD grant, which stands for Treatment Alternatives in Diversion, specifically targeted at this population of society that are addicts, that are people that have substance abuse problems, and that those substance abuse problems are what causes them to engage in criminal activity. So the way that our diversion program helps these people is they assess the treatment needs that they will have. They'll have them get something called an AODA assessment, and that will have then treatment recommendations that our diversion coordinator, our diversion people in our office make sure that these individuals then follow through with the treatment recommendations that come out of the assessments. They can help them get into treatment programs, help them find treatment programs that are suitable for them, and make sure that they follow through with it. They ensure that these people are maintaining their abstinence from drugs by having them complete random testing to ensure that they remain sober, and they provide this MRT training that we heard a bit about as Rick was up here. Currently, there are 49 individuals that are in the diversion program specifically under the TAD grant, so these are 49 people that are specifically there addressing these substance abuse problems. But it's not just the diversion program in our office that also does a lot of work towards helping bring about rehabilitation. It's also our victim witness program. What we see with people who are addicts is that some of the first people that they harm are people that are very close to them. So we have a lot of cases where parents of addicts are victims, whether they've been physically harmed or they have had property harm that has been done to them, things that have been stolen, pawned off. Family heirlooms get pawned off for little amounts of money so that these addicts can go and get their fix. This really hurts families. It tears families apart. But I'm impressed by how often these people who come into our office as victims want to see their children get help. Even though their children might do terrible things to them, parents very often want their kids to get help. And our diversion program has set up some information and can provide resources to parents of kids who are suffering with addiction to help them get into treatment on their own. Further, in addressing these demand issues with the drug problem, I see my role as being one where I go outside of this traditional role of the prosecution in filing cases and obtaining convictions, but taking a more active role in bringing about recovery. So I'm still fairly new here in the district attorney's office here in St. Croix County, but I want to take a much more active role in getting together with more community stakeholders and trying to find more innovative solutions to try and help bring about recovery for these people in our community. So I have been designated to a subcommittee through the CJCC to address substance abuse and addiction problems, and I look forward to beginning to talk about some solutions that we can try and accomplish there. So thank you very much.
Is there any questions?
Any questions?
Regarding the TAD grant, is that a one-time only grant, or is it something that we apply for annually?
I think we're on our third year. Yeah. It's an annual grant, but we're on our third year.
Supervisor Cook?
You mentioned that there was at least a small increase in prosecutions or filings this year. I know you have only been with St. Croix County for a short time. Do you see that as consistent with other counties similar to us? I mean, is that kind of following the trend from other counties, or?
Sure. So I came from La Crosse County, and we saw a fairly similar pattern as it related to methamphetamine usage, where before I came here to St. Croix, there was certainly an uptick in methamphetamine use, though I haven't compared the numbers from St. Croix County and Cross County.
Supervisor Ring?
I was happy to hear at the end of your presentation you're talking about the CJCC, the subcommittee you're on, because when you talk about the addiction, I think we need sort of a cultural intervention too. We hear from the parents of the kids who aren't here anymore. I mean, what role will you play there? And I'm thinking that we'll also hear that from, the sheriff when he talks, the upstream work that we can do. Do you feel like we're doing the right things upstream from where it lands on your desk?
Well, so this is me coming in with a little experience about what has been done in the past. So I know that there have been community outreaches in the past, and I think you're going to hear from Patty Schochner, who would like to do some more of that in the future, and I want to lend myself to assist in that in any way that I can. It is going to take a lot of knowledge in the community, particularly parents, and a big problem right now is people abusing prescription opiates. That's a problem that's been around for a while, and it continues to be a problem. And there's going to be reaching out to parents and healthcare providers and making sure that prescriptions are appropriately handed out and things of that sort. So I'll be looking more into that.
Well, I just, on that
Supervisor
note,
Nelson?
We've had some experience on that with methamphetamine. So I'm hoping, we had epidemic issues on that in the 90s. And hopefully we can use some of those techniques also. I mean, so we've had some experience on that, so. And I think, the victim issue is significant here because we've had parents of drug people come in, not only of deceased drug users, but also people that are involved. And that's why we're trying to get our victim witness people involved with them. Because they come in and they say, my son's involved in heroin, we don't know what to do, can you help us? Or is there places we can go for treatment or whatever? So.
And you have answers for them? Or,
We
I mean,
try.
that's what we have to do.
We try. I mean, it's better than, before it was, yeah, we try. I mean, I don't want to go too far and say we have answers, but yeah, we try. So I think those are some of the things we can do. But I agree, the upstream, we're at the end. Prosecution is at the end of this. Upstream is where the solutions that we found through Fred and some of those departments, I think.
Supervisor Nelson?
How does the diversion program and the drug court work together? I've heard a lot about diversion. Where does drug court fit into this? Because I think they should kind of work hand in hand. I'm looking at you, Ron, a little bit, and I'm looking at you guys, because is it after diversion, do you end up in the drug court? Or do you end up in either or? Or do you recommend someone for the drug court and one for? What are the parameters? Because I've heard a lot about diversion, which I'm all for, but we're also funding drug court. So what are we doing to make sure that both programs are utilized?
Drug court is for high-risk offenders. I think there's 12 people in drug court now, but it's for high risk. Diversion is for low risk, low to medium risk. So that's the big difference. So there's interchange, and our diversion coordinator goes to drug court meetings, but you don't want people in diversion that are high risk, and I think that's the biggest difference.
So, from what I've taken being at the drug court graduations, they don't get a second chance. They goof up, they go right back to jail, correct? But in diversion, it's a little bit different where they either fix the problem or else they go to be prosecuted?
Depends on the person. Some of their convictions are being withheld. Some of them, depends on what they did. But yeah, we do have, they're called DJOCs, Deferred Judgment of Conviction. So if somebody does screw up on diversion, they go right into sentencing. They've already been convicted. But there is some latitude. Drug court has latitude too. Just because somebody screws up, they don't immediately go to jail. I mean, right. But diversion has that we have that option also.
And that's why drug court is always post-conviction. You're trying to reduce the sentence. That's their incentive to get into drug court, is to get out of jail, basically, versus the diversion, which can be pre-prosecution, if you will. You're trying to divert them from the prosecutory procedure, and then drug court would be, I've already been convicted of a felony, now I don't want to sit 2 more years, I'll go into drug court, get out, and work my program, and be able to be out being a productive member of society, because it requires employment and all sorts of checks and balances versus sitting in jail.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Supervisor Scholberg?
Just wondering, when our drug prosecutor, Ed, was first hired, how long has he been on duty?
Mid-August.
Of this year?
Right.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the fact that this board made sure that the funding was there so that you could be hired. At least your initial reports are very promising, and Godspeed with good work, outreach, and helping out with this huge problem that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank the board for its support on that issue. That's a big issue here.
Any other questions No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Victim witness, Pam, you,
I did.
you did that? Okay,
Right. Unless Pam
thank you.
wants to say something, but no. Good.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for victim witness? If not, we'll move on to child support. Chad Walski.
I'm Chad Wolski for you that don't know me. I think one thing with the child support program that people might not be aware is our mission statement. It's to help families become self-sufficient by establishing and enforcing child support orders. That's the goal of our agency, not just the collection piece, which is sort of what normally our annual report sort of covers is the total numbers, but there's a lot of things that have to happen in our agency before we can get to the point of actually collecting child support for families, adjudicating paternity for unmarried parents, enforcing or establishing the child support orders, but also medical support orders as well to ensure that children have health insurance coverage. And then once we get to that point, then that's when we can do the enforcement of the child support and medical support obligations. Some of the goals that we've achieved over this last year, we did collect over $14.5 million in child support payments this year. That's an increase over our 2014 level. We did also meet all the federal performance expectations set out for us, which gives us 100% of our contract funding. And we also perform service contracts for other counties. So we performed service contracts for Dunn County, Pepin County, and Buffalo County. Range of items for those counties, financial processing of their cases, some case management, training of new staff, and we all did that with the same number of FTEs as we did in the prior years. In addition to our regular duties, our staff also attend the St. Croix Valley Bar free legal clinic. They staff that, which is once a month, and provide information regarding the child support program, how to apply for services, information on their cases. They can't give legal advice, that's what the attorneys in the room at the time are for, but we can give them procedural processes in the child support program, and then just general information on how to request modifications, how to establish an order, those types of things, where the pro se documents are. Our department also leads the Wisconsin-Minnesota Border Project. This is a collaborative group that meet twice a year to improve processes on our interstate cases. Most recently, we've reviewed cases with Minnesota on deceased potential fathers with children where paternity is not established and the father has passed away. Minnesota didn't have a process on how to establish paternity in those cases, and we shared what St. Croix County does, what the state of Wisconsin does, and now their state is implementing a process to establish paternity in cases where potential fathers have passed away. This will entitle the children not only so they'll have medical information, genetic information from the father, but also Social Security death benefits that wouldn't be available for them unless paternity is established. Our agency also represents on state sponsors work groups, perform testing for new software the state has developed, and at our annual conference, our agency did a training conference relating to improving child support performance statewide. So what we're doing locally, we're sharing with other counties so they can sort of take our best practices and hopefully improve their collections and establish rates as well. Other accomplishments, Katie Capon, the previous supervisor of our agency, was awarded a Hall of Fame award by the Wisconsin Child Support Enforcement Association. She was presented that in October. And our caseload continues to grow, but internally, the staff have really been great on improving efficiencies that we can do locally. And some of the things that we're working on in this next year is converting all of our paper files to electronic case files. still achieving the federal performance measures for our agency and promoting community awareness of the child support program. We plan to do that by early intervention and the use of media to pass along the information on the child support program. And none of this would be possible without the staff of our agency. I just want to point out that since 2003, we've had a decrease in our total FTEs in our agency, and our caseload has increased by over 60%. But in the past 2 years, we've been able to have the 2 highest years of collections in our agency, and also it's the only 2 years in our child support program in St. Croix County that we've exceeded all 4 of the federal performance measures. And this is all during a time where we've had 3 new specialists come on board. They all have less than 2 years of child support specialist experience. And that's 40% of our total specialist staff that we have in our agency. So new people, new training, higher caseloads, but they've been able to exceed everything that we've had in place before. So I have certificates of recognition that I'd like to present to my staff, and they're in the audience. So if you guys want to just come up over here, and then I'll give you each certificate. Heather Jensen, Lisa DeWall, Lisa Plunkett, Pam DeBruzzi, Tracy Bray, and Sherry Marks. It's because of their work that we're able to keep on performing excellent, in an excellent manner. So, thank you.
Thank you for the good work.
And if there's any questions, I can.
Any questions? No questions? Thank you, Chad.
Make it
Appreciate
easy on me. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. We'll move on to the Sheriff's Annual Report in the jail. Sheriff John Schultz.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. Before I get into my annual report, I was listening to District Attorney Johnson when he gave his presentation, and I really think that he's done such great work with this Stop Drugs program. I've been fortunate enough to be invited by him on a few occasions to actually speak at that event and participate in that event. And we learned in our office probably about a month ago that Rick was going to end that particular program. And from my experience as both a drug investigator and for many, many years being an advocate of community policing, I was sad to see that go away. But I was very happy. About 2 weeks ago, Chief Deputy Scott Knutson came to me and we were talking about that Stop Drugs program, and with District Attorney Johnson's blessings, Scott Knutson came to me and asked if he could take that program up. So I'm happy to say that Scott's going to continue. So let's move on to my report then. What I've supplied you with is a highlight of what we've identified in the Sheriff's Office as our goals for 2016. Obviously, we like to be in line with the county strategic plan, the map, the road map, if you will, that you as the county board has put forward, the areas that you'd like to see us working on. So there's nothing real big, so to speak, in the jail and courts. We always continue to work on PREA compliance, which is a big deal. It's a buzzword. It's Prison Rape Elimination Act. We as a county jail don't have to be compliant. However, if we want to hold state or federal inmates ever, we need to be. And quite frankly, if we ever do have an incident, the more compliant we are, the more strides we're making to be compliant, the better off we will be in any potential civil litigation. So I do think it's a good program. We are working to strive towards compliance. As a smaller jail, I don't know that we'll ever be totally compliant because I don't think we can afford it. But we will do everything we can, given the facilities that we have. We'll continue to look at, one of the concerns in the jail, and you've heard me talk about it before, is the number of individuals who reside in the jail with either mental illness issues and or medical issues. Medical is a force, a driving force that we spend a considerable amount of money each year on because we have contracted services for doctors, nurses, and all of those things. One of the things that we're researching at this point is designating a smaller cell block area. Would it be beneficial to have a special management cell block unit where we've got the nursing staff right next to that area, a little better, more constant monitoring, taking those individuals with the health issues and the mental health issues out of our booking area, which is, because of the way we're designed, that's where we house them now. And with that increased traffic, it's always a busy place, that can sometimes tend to exacerbate, if you will, some of those issues. So maybe getting that to a little quieter spot, helping to calm those individuals and treat them for their underlying issues and just getting them to have a safer stay. So you'll see more about that in the future, but we'll bring that obviously to public protection, and if it ever comes to fruition, we'll see that at the board level. In our Field Services Bureau, we talk about one of the goals was wanting to reduce the crime rate per capita. One of the things that we're seeing is we have one of the only computer forensic labs on this side of the state. The state of Wisconsin operates a computer forensic lab, but for us to send these devices to them results in a wait of months to get the data back. We found that it's much more beneficial for us to have a quicker turnaround. We have that data, and then we can analyze it and go forward with making the connections in the case. We used to talk a lot about doing forensic examinations of computers. Well, the criminal element has gone away from the computers. They don't, everything can be on a mobile device now. So your cell phone, your iPad, whatever it is, they can take their whole operation with them and can do everything that they need on those. So we're seeing the analyzing and the downloading of the evidence from the computers declining, but we're seeing a spike then in those mobile devices. And you can see in the report, a lot of that takes quite a bit of time. And we have to keep up with technology. I mean, probably all of us have a cell phone, and we know that, that technology is constantly evolving. So there's training that needs to go along. There's software that needs to go along. You'll see a little later in the bonding is we've asked for a newer, higher speed, beefed up computer to help drive down some of the times it takes to download this evidence. So that's one thing that we're going to be keeping an eye on. You've seen in the past where we've asked for a crime data analyst. That position would dovetail in with what we're seeing here. We've got trained individuals who can download this data. Then if we have someone who can sift through it, put it together, map it out for the officers that are out on the street and disseminate that, I think we'll get a better product. We also talked a little bit about, or at least you did with Ed and Rick, about the drug issues that we're seeing. And remind me of, a couple of the questions were very good, and I don't want to forget them, so if I don't hit them on the way through, please remind me at the end. But you talked a little bit about heroin, and heroin is a horrible drug. It's a horrible drug because you can use it once and die. And that's why we were seeing it not just at a local level, but quite frankly across the state of Wisconsin and in other parts of the United States, we were seeing people that were dying from heroin. And so when you have something like that, that squeaky wheel, if you will, has to come to the forefront. We are seeing that. We have people dying from it. We need to do something to combat it. So what we did with your help is we came to you and we said, we'd like 2 new positions, and we're going to put them out on the street. We're going to call them a crime suppression team, and I want them to focus on the issue of heroin, which also dovetails into prescription opiate abuse. So this team has been in place for 3 months. We've given them 68 felony-level investigations so far in 3 months. They've made 33 felony arrests. Now, these are not the kind of investigations that we can, do like Law and Order on TV and be done in an hour. These are things that take, many, many hours, days, weeks, sometimes months. So this team is being very, very effective. What we do with them is they're not responsible to take any other calls. They're not responsible to, do anything else unless it's an emergency that's in front of them. And we focus them every day. We look at the trends that we're seeing. We're looking at the people that we're finding out about, and we're saying, we want to work on these. This is an area that we want you to focus on. We'll get it. And in my opinion, it's being very, very successful. We may, if this trend continues, we may talk more about continuing those efforts and maybe even expanding them depending on how successful we are. But to the degree that we have that team out there right now, I thank you for your support on that. The original numbers look good. Looks like we're making a difference. I agree with Ed when he told you that, and I could back up a minute. We've got 519 total drug arrests so far in 2015. Only 7 of those were for heroin. Now, I say only 7, not to say that it's not an issue, because it is, because again, if you take heroin once, you can die. And we want to make sure that we're combating that. These are very small, tight groups that are choosing to use heroin, and they're hard to get into, but we'll continue those efforts. The bigger problem that comes with that, or across with that, is the prescription opiate abuse. There's been some legislation that has advanced through at the state level this year, where we're now able to get and partner and share information with the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. So what happens is we can set some search parameters, and we can identify the people who are either doctor shopping, drug shopping, so they're going from one doctor's office to the next, to the next, to the next, getting these prescriptions. And either, if they're abusing them, what our goal would be is trying to get them into treatment, right? Or if they're diverting and selling them, then those are the people that we want to focus on and use Ed's help to prosecute those folks, get them off the street. One of the other things that I think is kind of a side note that's beneficial is, by bolstering this program, the local physicians, the local providers and prescribers are now being notified how they're doing compared to their counterparts. Are you prescribing too much pain medication, too much opiates? Take a look at yourself and see what's going on. And now that medical board is also getting involved, saying, hey, if your numbers are too high, we'll get a notice and we're gonna have a little chat. And I think that would help as well. Because, we all know that these physicians are busy, and sometimes they don't supposedly have the time to look at that PDMP to see if their patient is doctor shopping. It used to be that the doctor themselves had to look at it. Now it allows a staff member to look so that that provider can be more educated, which is a good thing. So all of these efforts, I think, will help. But obviously, this is a community problem. And I think Patty will talk more about what she's seeing on her end as far as some of these long-term abuses of these prescription medications and what we can do as a community to help with that. One of the things that Supervisor Ring, you touched on too, was what are we doing as far as educating the community. I think the implementation of the CJCC has helped a lot. We're now talking across the aisle with our partners in county government and Health and Human Services, the DA's office, medical examiner, the medical community. Everybody's sitting at the table and we're discussing these problems, and we're realizing the cause and effect that each of our actions or inactions might have on someone else. And I think we're starting to really focus in on what we can do to help. We've got community notification guides that are given out to every individual who leaves the jail now, that talks about treatment facilities that are available, housing that might be available. I think that's a help. We've got Patty Schachter leading the charge on some of her community organization events, whether it's drug abuse, suicide, things like that. Those are great efforts. We love partnering in things like those, and and Patty's doing a great job in leading that way. So just that community involvement, I think Rick Johnson hit it on the head when he said, we've got some experience from the methamphetamine epidemic days in the 90s. And that was something that I was right in the middle of. And I like to draw on those, and this is what we did. We came together as a community, we educated each other, we started the outreach programs. The diversion programs that you're seeing, I think, are working. You know, those people that don't need to be in jail and get educated, because quite frankly, what prison is a school for criminals, as it turns out, you know. So some folks we need to be protected from, others may self-correct with the right guidance. And I think we spend our money more wisely there with helping some people self-correct rather than throwing them away and making them a more educated criminal sometimes. So I support those efforts. Other than that, I threw you some stats out there, but I don't know if you have any questions, concerns.
Supervisor Cook.
Yeah, Sheriff, you mentioned that a number of the inmates are coming in with medical needs. You know, that's a cost for us. I'm wondering if if there's a process in place to screen those individuals to see if they're already receiving any kind of public subsidized, medical coverage. Are you working with Human Services to do that? And because my experience in other county governments in the past, that can be a duplicative cost that, is really, if taxpayers are already paying for that at one point, we don't want to spend that money again at the local level.
We do screen them. Our contracted provider also helps us screen them. One of the things that we're seeing is when an individual goes into custody, they lose those benefits. So the state doesn't pay, so now we're on the hook. One thing that we have implemented is if an individual comes in, and I don't do this often, it has to be a legitimate medical case, because as you can imagine, I get asked for electronic monitoring all the time because, well, quite frankly, I'd rather sleep in my own bed than, on the concrete one that we give them in jail. But we get people, if they have a legitimate medical need where it's difficult or impossible for us to provide, I will utilize electronic home monitoring. And when they're on that, they become responsible then for their own medication costs. But if they're in the jail, the state doesn't cover them, so we have to. And that's that trade-off. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I didn't look this morning, but I'm gonna guess we've usually got 7 or 8 people out on electronic monitoring at one time.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? None. Supervisor Ring?
I've just learned more and more, or I'm learning more about the mental health issues, and a lot of times those land right at your doorstep. And is there those incidents? Do you have the training, the support? I know we've taken a lot of time, and I really appreciate your presentation. But any insights on where we are with that, or what's happening, or your perspective?
Yeah, there's continuing efforts at the state level. Captain Van Sumeren from our office sits on a state board that's reviewing mental health in jails and trying to formulate plans on how we can deal with it on a statewide level. We have mental health providers that come into the jail from our own Health and Human Services. We've got a mental health, a lesser grade, if you will, mental health individual that comes as part of our contracted services. So that individual can see inmates each day. Plus, we've got the doctor and the nurses that are on staff 24/7. What ends up happening, quite frankly, is there really isn't another place for these individuals currently. So they end up at the jail. They're so disruptive in, at a particular time in a crisis, but they don't meet the criteria for Chapter 51, an emergency detention. And I think the county has done a really good job at addressing that with the mobile crisis workers and now utilizing safety plans and things. But, sometimes you get those individuals who just don't quite meet that crisis, but you can't leave them in the community because they're being that disruptive. They're not necessarily dangerous, but, disruptive, and they end up in the jail. And I think as we continue to assess, I would like to be able, but medical records are such that I'd like to be able to pass the information I have from my medical providers and from HHS staff to to the district attorney's office and to the courts that we might want to focus more on a mental health aspect here versus going ahead with a criminal prosecution. I'm not quite sure how we overcome that yet because of the HIPAA rules that apply. But I think that would be one area that I'd really like us to focus on as a state and as a nation, to say, is there a way to get around HIPAA when someone is potentially losing their liberty in a jail when they really are not criminal, they are mentally ill? And I hope that's where it goes. I don't have the answer, though.
Any other questions? Thank you, Sheriff Schultz. We'll move on to our Emergency Support Services Annual Report with Stephen Takash.
Good morning. I'm Stephen Takash. I'm your Interim Director of Emergency Support Services. I'm happy not to follow Ramberg to the podium, although I ran into the medical examiner this morning. She said, I'm following you this morning. Makes me really nervous. I checked my pulse and my forehead, and I think I feel okay. I have some observations before I start. I had the luxury of being a department head in St. Croix County, some of you may know, from 1980 to 1990, before I left for DC. And back then, each of the departments was kind of an entity unto itself. We just did our things. I showed up at the office one day in the mid-1980s, and there was a complete computer system, brand new, installed in my office. Unbeknownst to me, the computer department, I wasn't called IT back then, it was called the computer department, I think, had just simply installed a computer system because they thought they knew what we needed. Well, it failed miserably. One of the things that I've observed since I've returned to St. Croix County is the cooperation, and I know our model says innovation through cooperation, is the cooperation that's fostered by the county board and the county administrator to bring us together as departments to recognize that we do not exist in a vacuum, that we do have overlapping responsibilities, that we can achieve economies of scale. And I think this is true maybe most notably in the CJCC. I came onto the CJCC as a citizen member. Before I came to work for the county, I was asked to serve. And it was the first time that all those with vested equities had been at the same table from the criminal justice perspective. And we had issues of mental health that have been addressed today, to sit around and see what we can do to improve the product, the final product. So bringing all those with, like I said, vested equities together at the table, I think has been a vast improvement in the delivery of services in the county that the district attorney alluded to and the sheriffs alluded to, and a few others. So I think that the county should be commended for it. I think Mike O'Keefe and Judge Lindell have done a great job in the CJCC. We're almost becoming a victim of our own success simply by our size, and now we're setting up subcommittees to begin to start looking at the real core issues and moving on to kind of the nuts and bolts of what we should be doing as a county and not operating in that vacuum. In addition, I think, and it's been addressed in my presentation to you folks several months back about the commitment to the Phase 2 911 Emergency Communication Center. You've stood up and not kicked the can down the road that's been done for 36 years. I think that's commendable. I know some of you have taken heat for some of what's gone on, but I'd like to say I think it is time to step up and recognize that there are needs in a county like ours. We're not the sleepy county that I worked in the 1980s where your big drug arrests were maybe a couple lids of marijuana. And I think in the 10 years I worked here, I think we had 3 homicides. They're all domestic related, as I recall, other than a neighbor, one with Bernie Flatham and Mrs. Wink. We're not that county anymore. There was a question about separating us from the Twin Cities. You can't. We are part of that SMSA, part of the metro area. We're a busy place. We're an $86 million corporation that has a CEO now that keeps us moving and pulls us together to ensure that we have innovation through cooperation. So I thank you for that and for indulging me on that. I'd like to start this morning with emergency management. I'm not going to, you've seen my county annual report, or it's in front of you. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but I did want to talk a little about the two main entities that I am responsible for: emergency management and emergency communications. Emergency management has that kind of day-to-day function that we don't think about until feces hits the oscillating device. I think that was probably brought home pretty clearly in Paris as a perfect example of what happens in mass casualty incidents. We saw it this summer. Kristen, who's our emergency management coordinator, was on, I think, on vacation for a few days when we had that July outbreak of flash flooding. And I had to step in, and I thought, oh my God, she does a hell of a job. Got tons of calls, spoke to town chairmen, chairpersons, village personnel, city personnel. River Falls got hit, O'Galley Township. Most of the damage was south of 94. But to bring that all together, spoke to the highway department, who had some culverts and roads washed out. And we don't really think of that sometimes in the role of emergency management, but that's another one of their functions. We got the chairman of the board to declare an emergency state so that we could apply as necessary for reimbursement or funding. And those are all kind of the roles and functions that fall into the plate of emergency management. We held an active shooter drill. Some of you were present for that or were aware of it in June at the Hudson High School. 300 people participated in that, over 30 agencies. And what I really want to tell you is you don't realize what it takes to put one of those events on. It was a year in the planning, 36 meetings or something of that nature. And that goes on with other activities in emergency management. Kristen's usually at least one night meeting a week on average, meeting with one of the town boards or the villages or the cities, helping them develop emergency management plans. I will tell you from my observations, emergency management on the county level has done well. Emergency management on the local level, it becomes somewhat of a, well, we'll get to it when we need it type function. And for example, in some of the areas, they double up and the police chief becomes the emergency management director or the fire chief or something like that, some type of secondary role. But we don't realize how important that is until the need is there. In fact, what we're going to do, which has not been done yet since the EOC was set up, is I've asked Terry, who's the emergency communications coordinator, and Kristen from emergency management, let's have a drill internally of our emergency operations center, see what works, what doesn't work. For some of those who use that room downstairs, it's more of a meeting room. I'd like to see it set up more as a true emergency operations center. We're going to start putting maps up and doing things of that nature to see our own internal responses. So when it comes to emergency management, I think you should be cognizant of the fact of what goes on behind the scenes, because that's what the daily planning and the daily activities are. I see some of you coming through the office to talk to Kristen. I see village board members in and out of the office and other town and city officials talking with Kristen, who's very active and energetic in getting out to the various local governments to help them. We had a mass dispensing exercise down in River Falls this summer, also in June. That was a joint effort between, in fact, it was between St. Croix and Pierce. We had the state of Wisconsin, the state of Minnesota, some federal officials. Do we have some federal officials involved in that? It was somewhat tied in with the nuclear power plant. Mass dispensing of medication in the event that something goes wrong, whether it's at the nuke power plant or there's some other event that would require that. But again, those are all a year in the planning where we've started some tabletop exercises in the county. We recently held a tabletop exercise for emergency management in North Hudson that Kristen organized with a hypothetical train derailment of cars carrying hazardous materials. We invited in all of the interested parties, police, fire, EMS, county highway, or I should say the village and city, public works departments, who all play a role in that. We are now preparing for next year's active shooter drill, which will be at St. Croix Central. Want to add anything to that? So emergency management, again, it's kind of one of those things that you don't really think about. It's just there. And you hope, as Chuck Mills always used to say, that when the balloon goes up, you hope that there is somebody there who can, I see Mr. Peavy laughing over there. He's heard that more than once. You hope that when that balloon does go up, that there are people there, that there are plans in place. But it takes training, training, and training to know that we can do it. And I commend Kristen and her staff of one, Natasha, for being on top of it all the time.
I might ask a
Supervisor
question.
Berkey.
I recently had some discussion with another individual involved in the Fair Board. Are we getting on top of things at the St. Croix County Fairgrounds in terms of an emergency management plan?
I'll let Kristen answer that. Terry and I and Kristen all went out to the Fair Board and met with them. It has some shortcomings, and I'll let Kristen address it.
Thank you. We have been meeting. We've met 3 times since that initial meeting. We're working on putting together an emergency plan for the fairgrounds. Yesterday I was out on the fairgrounds and we took pictures of all the buildings on site, and then also trying to identify emergency shelter locations for the population on site. But it is a work in progress. We're putting information together to present to the Fair Board in January and February, and then making recommendations for the emergency procedures and possibly some equipment recommendations for them to improve the area. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear the progress.
And we're happy to help, because they need it. Emergency communications, you're spending a chunk of money on our Phase 2 project, so I thought a very, very brief update on that would be appropriate. We are done acquiring tower sites with the agreement, long-term lease at no cost with the city of Hudson to use 2 of its water towers. We've reached agreement with the village of Roberts for a 25-year lease for $1 on village property to build a monopole tower, 199 feet, and a 25-year lease for $1, although with the city of River Falls, in their lease contract with the city of River Falls, they asked for that $1 in advance. So I've got to get it together, get a check drawn from Bob, and send River Falls $1. But we do have leases now with the city of River Falls and the village of Roberts to build. We've gone to bids for our first 3 towers, Deer Park, Somerset, and the Nourishment Nursing Center. The bids have been let. We're just negotiating contracts right now with the successful bidder, and we hope to have towers up in those locations probably sometime in spring. The good news is all of our bids have come in under the forecast. As you will recall, I appeared before you this summer to discuss funding for this project. At the time, we didn't know that the Roberts Water Tower was going to be structurally deficient. Since then, we've had to substitute a monopole for the use of the water tower. I have not come back to you and asked for more funds because we're scrubbing numbers and hoping between what we can save in the bid process and scrub some other numbers and kind of relook at the books that we can cover the costs of that Roberts monopole through the existing numbers. But the Phase 2 project is moving along on pretty much on time. We're maybe 2 weeks to a month behind schedule, but that's always in flux. We don't know what the final bid numbers will be because now that we've acquired the last of our tower sites in Hudson, River Falls, and Roberts, we can then have the engineers develop a final microwave path. Once the final microwave path is developed, then we can let the bids out for the microwave radio system, which we hope to do before Christmas. From there, we'll bid out the remaining 2 towers, and as soon as we're able to acquire the necessary frequencies for our simulcast radio system, that will also go to bid in spring. So the project is pretty much on schedule and so far within budget. In acquiring all of the tower sites in the county and the water tower space within the villages and cities, it's another one of those things that I wanted to note, that you as the county board don't always recognize what your staff is doing. Terry Anderson, our emergency communications coordinator sitting behind me to my left, attended 58 meetings of villages and boards and panels and committees and commissions just to get the approval for all those locations. We've now walked away from all of those with leases at no cost to the county. So I commend Terry for that. Nice job. In the Emergency Communications Center, there's an ebb and flow of calls. Sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down. The numbers you have in front of you, we handled about 150,000 calls for assistance, or will this year. Of those 150,000, you know one of them because you recognized a dispatcher before the county board several months ago. But that's not necessarily atypical. The staff, particularly since we implemented the emergency medical dispatch, is on the phone providing pre-arrival instructions, pre-arrival of the ambulance, instructions to callers now. We're better attuned to helping the callers. And one of the other things that you'll see in the future years, and I'm not requesting any new positions, but for officer safety, one of the things that these gentlemen in the back want to know before they send their officers into situations is what are they getting into. When I worked here in the 80s, we pretty much took a call, got off it, and dispatched a deputy or a city police officer to the call, and we weren't on the phone any longer with the caller, so if circumstances changed, we didn't necessarily know what was going on. Today, what we find is it's necessary to stay on the phone longer with callers, which is why sometimes if you ever stick your head in the dispatch center, you will see 3 or 4 dispatchers on duty. And sometimes they don't look real busy, and honestly, I was in there the other day, it was quieter than a church. And 30 seconds later, all 4 phones were ringing and all hell broke loose. So it's kind of the nature of our business. 90%, well, I wouldn't even say 90% boredom followed by 10% chaos. I think it's more about 90% chaos followed by 10% boredom. But one of the things that we're doing is we're establishing communications with the callers, trying to ascertain what we're sending our officers into for officer safety. In the emergency medical dispatch arena, we're trying to give pre-arrival instructions, which, as you know from recognizing Tom Barthman here, one of our dispatchers, it can save the life of one of our citizens, in that case, an infant citizen. After Tom was, and the Sheriff's Department and the EMS were recognized here, they were also recognized on the floor of the state legislature in Madison, courtesy of our representatives and state senator. So those 150,000 calls run the gamut from the proverbial cat in the tree to my husband's not breathing, can you help me? Or my child's not breathing, which is, as a former dispatcher, I can tell you, is nothing but sheer terror. But we're training our dispatchers to handle those calls better, to handle them in sequence, to be able to give pre-arrival instructions, and I think that will improve the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens in the county, which is our mission. Of course, none of this is possible without your support and the support of the 22 men and women, their commitment and dedication of those 22 men and women of the Emergency Communications Center and the emergency management staff who day in, day out take those calls, do the planning, and make sure that when you go home and sleep at night, you know there's somebody on the other end of that 911 phone call. You know that if a tornado comes during the night, we'll be out there working. Are there any questions?
Don't see any questions at this time, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Everybody ready for a little recess? Let's take a 10-minute recess, come back in at 10 after. At this time, our meeting will reconvene, and we'll have our medical examiners report with Patty Schockner, please.
Hello, and thank you for asking me to speak a little bit today. And then I hope you've all read my super interesting annual report. Just to I just have a few highlights that I wanted to go over with you. Access, of course, is always the big thing. What is the access, especially when you're dealing with drugs? And if you go back and talk to people in drug court and all that, they're always talking about at home. So just to give you a little perspective, in 2012 we had 178 registrations for hospice. Of those, 50% were at home or registered to die at home. So far this year we're at 370, and 50% of them are registered at home. So that's, when we talk about access points, that's an access point, and it's huge, and that's where the whole conversation about prevention really needs to be had. I have the privilege of working with some of the most compassionate people, whether it's HSS, the Sheriff's Department, the local police departments, Register of Deeds, the District Attorney's Office, just to name a few. We all work together, and when we're dealing with an unexpected death, it's stressful for all of us. And when you look at my numbers and we talk about the deaths in St. Croix County, and if you go to unnatural deaths, you'll see that accidental deaths is the biggest part of where our investigations are. And those investigations usually lead to drugs and addiction. Our numbers show that 66% of our accidental deaths dealing with drugs are with prescription drugs. 27% alcohol, and then about 3% of meth, cocaine, and heroin. So prescription drugs and alcohol are our biggest fight, and we know that. Those of us that work in this business know that. So there's a lot of things that we can do in prevention, and one of the things that we're working at this year is to have a summit. That summit would be, it's either going to be a countywide or also 3 countywide. We're still in the planning. But it's going to be for local government, school districts, town boards, village boards, county boards, to come together and have their people that deal with this talk about it, to inform them as to what this battle is all about. A lot of times we have all the information here, but it really doesn't get disseminated out to really touch on what addiction looks like. We need to educate them. The next thing is mentorship. I've worked really hard to propose mentorship. It's proven, especially with kids, that to have a strong mentorship will actually help deflect in addiction, especially kids that are living with addiction. We talk a lot about kids that are living with addiction and living in addiction. Kids living with addiction, those are their parents that are functioning addicts. And when we talk about our adult and accidental deaths, most of the deaths that come through our office are families living in addiction. The kids are the ones that are the big victims because the families, the adults, are functioning addicts, whether it's functioning alcoholic or functioning prescription drug abuser or a legal drug abuser. And that's a tough place to be. So we need to really think about really fostering that whole collaboration and mentorship and everything. And we're working really hard with our department to do that. Currently, our department mentors students in the Hudson School District, the St. Croix Central School District, the Somerset School District, and Glenwood City just reached out to us also for mentors. So if anyone has an opportunity or an inkling that would like to be a mentor, let me know, because there's lots of kids out there that are reaching out for adults to help them because they're living with addiction. And when you get phone calls from adult children and teenage children whose parents have died by addiction, it's a tough thing. You know, now they're living this nightmare, and they need compassion and empathy. our data, when you look at it, it's really based on death certificates. It's not based on arrests. It's not based on access to the system. It's based on the final story in their life's chapter book, and that is how they died. And it describes cause and manner, and that's what our department is responsible for, is, you know, finalizing that. And a lot of these people are not receiving services. So we are doing a really great job making sure with drug court and diversion and everything that we're doing, but there's a whole population out there that their families are living with addiction that are not receiving any services, and really starting to communicate and informing the public about that group is going to be our strongest way to work on prevention. And when you look at the numbers, especially with access to opiates and how this number is going to continue to grow, because we have the right to make that choice to hospice at home. But, you know, what can we do? If it was me that was hospicing at home, I would want to be informed as to, you know, okay, if I have all these opiates, you know, what should I do? Because law enforcement and myself will tell you, when we go to the homes, they're on the kitchen cupboard. Well, if you have people visiting, you know, which is what happens, you know, that person could or could not have an addiction, and, you know, it's just right there in the open. Well, just the safety piece of it, of having drug lockers, you know, for your house. And there's just a lot of information that we can do on the prevention side on, you know, at the very beginning, that I think we can also start to see some changes. So that's all I have. I don't know if you guys have any questions for me. Yes?
Supervisor Schott?
Just two quick questions. As far as like suicide and addiction, do we have like average statistics for those?
Yes. Our suicide numbers through the prevention strategies that we've worked has actually decreased. In 2011, we had 18 suicides, and so far this year, we are at 8. So we have really, really worked hard collectively with law enforcement, mental health, all the different agencies together have worked really hard on suicide prevention and catching them before it's a completion. You know, we haven't caught them all, and of course zero suicide would be where we'd want to be, but we're in the right direction. The thing is, we can't stop. We have to keep on doing the things that we're doing so that we stay in the forefront, because as soon as we start letting up, then that person who's feeling hopeless, worthless, and helpless then believes that no one out there cares, and that's the big thing.
I meant like who they are.
What do you mean?
Average age.
41-year-old white male college-educated business professional.
That's for suicide?
Yes.
What about, do you have one for, off the top of your head, do you have one for addiction too? Like the average?
Addiction is 45-year-old white male college-educated working professional. That is what our statistics are in St. Croix County. And part of that has to do with the fact that we are wealthy. We're a county that can afford to get prescription drugs. So that's the access piece is huge there.
Any other questions? Supervisor Schoberg?
It's just similar to that suicide report, which was positive that it's going down. The overdose reports say trending from 2011 through the last
We've doubled in the last year in fatal overdoses. So
and mostly from the prescription drugs?
Yeah.
And the heroin overdoses have been what this?
We had one this year.
One this year.
Yeah. And that. And that one there was totally trackable from point of access to the overdose. So, and the one thing with the heroin overdoses, you know, with the option of having Narcan present, that has helped a lot. So one of the things that we're trying to do is working with the hospitals to find out how many doses of Narcan is actually given out. You know, it's hard to understand where addiction is when, you know, are people coming into the emergency rooms, getting Narcan, stabilized, and then released. I was at a conference, and in Milwaukee County, they use so much Narcan in their emergency rooms that they actually got a special rate on the cost. So it's, you know, but we don't have that information here, and that there is useful data. So.
Supervisor Peavy?
I just had a question. Do you anticipate any issues with the new group of people that have moved into our area that don't deal with the medical professional?
Oh.
So they don't deal with the government at all? Have you reached out to them, or?
That's a great question. Yes, we did reach out to them, myself and Jeff Kennett and EMS guy went out, and we had a meeting in their schoolhouse, and it was, we found out a lot of things, and we asked them to make sure and put their name and stuff on the orange sign so that we would know how to communicate with their family members. It was a very insightful meeting, and they were open to medical interventions. The only thing is they don't believe that once the heart stops pumping to do CPR. So up until then, do whatever you can to help them. So that was good for us to know.
Supervisor Rain?
I just want to go back to the suicide rate with heroin. I was at a conference, and there was a presenter, and it was really interesting, and it was from the Dane County area, I believe, as an investigator. But what he said, and I think it was the track that you were going down, is that actually this incidence or the use of Narcan may be masking the severity of the problem, because if we look at we're down to 1, because it didn't result in a death, this prevents death, but
right.
It's the problem it may be masking the bigger problem, not a smaller one.
Correct. Correct. Because what they're saying is the people, when they use the Narcan, they wait to the very end of the high to give the Narcan, because it's better the longer you wait. And so it's a very dangerous road that they go down, but when you use heroin, most heroin users are not alone. And so there's usually one sober person there that gives the Narcan and monitors that. So you're right, it probably is masking what the numbers are.
Another follow-up question regarding the Narcan. Is that available in schools, school nurse programs? What about non-public schools, facilities?
You can get it anywhere. There was a meeting that was held here in Hudson that I happened to hear about, and it was in this secret place. I went, and I got 5 doses. And it was a room full of people. They trained us, they showed us a video, and the video showed a person overdosing on heroin. This is what it looks like. Here's what you do. Drop the meds. Here's the stuff, the Narcan, and it came right out of it. And I walked out of there. I walked in, never gave my name, and walked out with 5 doses of Narcan. And so did the other 30 people that were there. So it's very accessible.
I guess my question, that's interesting. What about, though, in a controlled environment like school health?
I think that would be a policy.
A policy.
I think that would be a policy at the school.
So that statewide, that you don't see that happening?
No.
Would you encourage that in a situation of an emergency where there's trained people?
You know, the ambulances all have Narcan. I guess that too would be a data thing, is to see how many people are actually overdosing on opiates in the school, to see. I don't know that number, but I can look that up. College has Narcan. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? None? Thank you, Patty, for your report. We'll move forward. The county administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, the October 2015 financials are in your packet. This represents expenditures and revenues through the end of October. We are currently at 75% of budget. In general fund expenditures, 76% of budget for all funds. And in terms of revenue, we are currently at 80% of budget for revenues through the end of October. So I don't see any huge discrepancies in any of the departmental budgets.
Supervisor Hanson?
Yeah, Mr. Thompson, we went nearly a quarter without a human resource director. What accounts for being at 108% variance in the human resources accounting category?
I believe majority of that was the separation compensation for the former HR director.
Did the McGrath study come out of the human resource budget?
Yes, and that as well.
That would be part of it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? None? Thank you. We'll move on into our resolutions. The first resolution, accepting the donation of a used van to the St. Croix County Health Center. And who wants to cover that? Supervisor Babbitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution came up through HHS board, excuse me. We're very grateful to Dr. Medini for the donation, and HHS felt this was something that the full board needed to deal with quickly. I think the only issue, as I recall, we had was wondering about whether or not we have policies in place to deal with how donations are handled. But aside from that, we wanted to pass this to the full board and support the passage of the resolution as written.
I'll second.
Supervisor Schottner?
Was that a motion? I'll second. Okay.
Motion
Okay,
made
I'll
and
second.
seconded. Is there any questions?
Just
Any
for
discussion? If there's no Supervisor
Yeah,
Berkey?
you know, just for clarification, we were talking over the break with Sandy about the use of the van, and I thought it might be good for the other board members to understand how it's going to be used in a therapy setting.
Good afternoon, or no, it's still morning. The van will be taken from right behind the driver's seat and the passenger seat and chopped off. And it will be totally gutted, engine, all of those things, foot pedals. And it will be used inside the therapy department to help teach and retrain people how to get in and out of vehicles as part of their rehab. Is there any questions about that?
I think it sounds excellent. Good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Discussion? If not, it's time to vote. That was unanimous. Thank you. The next resolution that we have on the agenda is resolution amending the rules and bylaws of the Board of Supervisors, St. Croix County regarding the County Library Planning Committee membership. Supervisor Schoberg?
Yeah, I'll move this resolution be adopted. The changes that appear are very slight. The original resolution had all the library directors becoming members, and that would have created some difficulties with communications between them since it's a governmental unit now being created. So we now are limiting it to just 2 library directors, which the chair will be appointing a little bit later on, and the term would be for 2 years. So any county supervisor would serve 2 years, any library director would serve 2 years, with the anticipation that there'd be a cycling of library directors, no permanent long-term positions. So I move that resolution be adopted.
I have a second. Supervisor Schottner seconded. Any discussion, questions? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor. We'll vote at this time. There we go. And that was unanimous too. Thank you. Our next resolution, we can do that, or we can, we have the appointments. I can give those now if you'd like those right after that. We had to wait till that resolution was done. There's 2 people from the administration committee, and the people that I have here for appointments would be Roy Schoberg, Judy Ochterhoff, and then 1 at large would be Dave Osnes. And then for the library, we have from Roberts, Chrissa Coleman, and from River Falls, Nancy Miller. And we had the one from Hudson here, Tina Norris, was a really good choice, but because she's just starting with her director's position down there, felt maybe a little more experience. In a couple of years that'll be coming up, we'll vote on it again, and they'll probably move around, these people, so that's why I didn't pick her for that position. She's a good person. I see no reason why she wouldn't do a good job. It's just I thought we needed somebody from a small and a large, and maybe at a later date we can do something else with other ones, and they can come up and rotate around a little bit too. So, and
Well, then
Question?
I would make a motion to approve
yes,
the suggested members of the library committee as
okay.
presented.
Thank you. Do I have a second to that? Supervisor Novotny seconded it. Is there any discussion, questions? If there are none, we have a motion and a second. We can vote on that now. One no and all yes. We'll compose ourselves and move on with the meeting. Could he change that vote if he wanted?
Reconsideration, revote. Does anyone object to Supervisor Schoberg changing?
Would anybody object if Supervisor Schoberg changed his vote at this time? If not, we'll let him change his vote if he would like. Would you like to change it? Yes. Okay. From no to yes. Yes. We'll move on to the number 3 resolution. Resolution amending the Human Resource Policy and Procedures Handbook, Article 10, Employee Benefit, Personal Time Off, PTO. Supervisor Schottner, make a motion. Second? Second, Supervisor Berkey.
Second that.
Any discussion you'd like to
Yes.
talk about? Schottner?
Some history, this comes out of getting us in line with the IRS. They're doing an investigation into our previous policy being illegal in ways. But basically what's being presented now is that they'll have to say that they want I'm trying to think of the words for it. They want to accept the payout prior to actually getting the payout. So they're going to say this year they want the payout for next year, and that is how they would be able to qualify for it. It would make it so that way we are in line with the IRS policies. We are still challenging our old policy as it is correct, but this helps us fix the problem as it is right now. With that, I would also submit a couple of amendments. So my motion to amend is that on line 65, we change the date from December to July. And on line 68, we remove the not. And
Mr. Chair, I've got a point of order. Has there been a motion to adopt, and shouldn't we have that before we have a motion to amend?
I did make the motion to adopt, and I believe it was seconded.
Yes, it was. What? There was a motion and a second.
Yes, there was a motion and a second, and now there's an amendment coming forward. Yeah.
All right, so my motion to amend is on line 65. We changed the date, or the month, from December to July. And on line 68, we removed the not and insert after prorated to 24 hours. So it would say prorated to 24 hours. Those two changes, for the explanation for the first one is that people would qualify for the payout as they're working. They would actually qualify for the payout in July, and if we don't offer the payout then, the dates or the extra time would actually go into a different account. So people if they're above their limit, it would actually make it so they get paid out sooner. The other one is is for part-time employees. They would qualify for 24 hours, which is the current policy. So the limit is 48 hours under this policy, and it changes what part-time employees are currently offered. So this would just insert what we are currently offering for part-time employees.
Any discussion?
That's going to be inserted on line 71?
The insert for the part-time is on line 68, where it says is not prorated. The change is to remove the not, so it would be is prorated, and then after prorated, it would be to 24 hours. If anybody requires more explanation, I believe our Corporation Counsel could probably do a better job.
Does everybody understand the amendment?
Could we have,
Supervisor Berkey?
well, I guess we need a second to that, and I'm not ready to second it. I just have a question regarding the legal ramifications of particularly the First Amendment, point of the amendment.
We as staff met after the administration committee, and this was an idea that we had that that in order to be consistent with our current policy that part-time employees would only be able to cash in 24 hours, so distinguishing between part and full-time employees that are in the same manner that they're currently distinguished with, and that then, because of the fact that we would reduce it to 24 hours, all of the employees would accrue that amount of time earlier in the year so we could do an earlier cash out. We reviewed this, or I reviewed this with our tax counsel, and he approves of the changes, so I have no issue with it.
What about the issue of July versus December?
That is not a problem either.
Supervisor Keesler? Yep. So we got a motion and a second for the amendment. Yep. So is there any further discussion? Are you all aware of what the amendment is on to change December to July and take not out, put after prorated 24 hours? So if there's no discussion, we'll vote on the amendment now. That was all yes, that passed. So now we're back to the original motion with the amendments in there. And there's a motion and a second already made on that. Are there any? Are there any questions? Supervisor Nelson.
As a lot of you are aware, I used to work in a public entity where we did this, or a government entity. This to me still seems backwards. What we did, and I asked about when I was out processing for my retirement, where I worked at the Airports Commission, is we declared what you wanted to do up to 60 hours. We call it vacation payback. I never did that because I liked my time off, but many other people did. We declared in October or November, I can't remember, of that year, we had to pay out in December. Now we're just flipping it around. Before you would declare it in December and get paid in January, but now you're declaring it the month in December and getting it the following year. We just flipped it. And I asked for the IRS ruling on it, and they even have internal auditors, and they said, with our internal auditors, we cannot skew any of these numbers. So the real way of doing this, from what I've learned, is you declare and you get the payout within that same year. So I can't support this resolution, because I still think it's backwards. Because if you look at it, what happens if something happens to you the following year and you've already declared you want to take 48-hour payout? Do you have to take that money and go into arrears? Or do you not get that payout? The easiest way to do it is to know what you have in that balance in October or November, and then declare what you want to do as a payout. That's the way I view it. Legality, I don't know, Wisconsin and Minnesota are different. But I think when you're talking about the IRS, I think you're talking to one big machine for the federal government.
Can you address that, Scott?
Well, if you do it that way, according to my opinion and tax council's opinion, the county will continue to, could be subject to the same type of scrutiny and potentially penalties and the employer paying the employee withholding tax and the employer withholding tax. The issue is constructive receipt, and I recognize that there's lots of governmental entities that do it this way. We've been flagged. We've looked at it. The issue is, in part, that an employee cannot elect something that they've already earned, and if it's an election, it has to be remote in time prior to the earning of the actual benefit. So under the scenario that you propose, we're not fixing anything. This, we believe, and our tax council believes, if there is a problem, fixes the problem. And the laws aren't, I mean, we're talking about federal tax law, not laws of different states.
Supervisor Nelson.
That's what I said. I think we're all dealing with the federal government. The thing I look at, and it's always been a little bit different to me, is how we work it from, you declare one year, then next year you're getting that payout. I think it should always be that you do within that year. So how is the federal government looking at it different for us than where I worked at on the other side of the river when we all do it? I don't know. I'm just putting the question out there. And guess what? The Airports Commission is a very big corporation that I worked for. It's a very, not a huge government because we only had 600 employees, but they're very cognitive of what they were doing. And that has always been a program that they've had. And I think that's a huge employee benefit too. Because ever since Act 10 and such, the employees been getting hammered enough. So I think this is something that hopefully the county makes sure that that's a benefit the employees can keep too.
Any other questions? Supervisor Schrottner?
I guess my point to what you're saying is I completely agree with you. What you proposed makes sense. But what is being challenged here and how it's being done makes it so it can't make sense. I agree. It shouldn't be that you should be able to say this, like, I worked this much time, I should be able to sell these dates back. That makes more sense to me than what we're doing here. But the problem is that we're addressing it as we can and working within the system that we have. In order to actually implement the changes that you want, it would be at the IRS level and not at our level. And I agree, but it's a frustrating thing that we've spent a lot of time talking about. It's just, this helps fix the current situation.
Supervisor Nelson?
What do we do next when the IRS finds that we're not in constructive receipt? Can we kind of visit this issue into the future and maybe make it to where something that I'm thinking about, as long as the IRS rules allow it, even though I worked at a place for almost 26 years to have that. I don't understand. You know what? I think the real problem is we had this issue a long time ago. It was never corrected back then. That's when we should have addressed the issue right away, and we probably wouldn't be talking about this right now. Correct? Because they're looking back at 2011, 2012, numbers like that. But I just want to make sure that this is not something that the employees lose as a benefit because it's an option. Or else the other problem you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of employees burning more vacation than we're going to be running short on staff because it's not going to really make it worthwhile for them to do the payout option if they have to wait until the end of the year.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Babbitt?
Yeah, I would echo some of Supervisor Nelson's comments. I'm trying to look at this from the standpoint of being an employee and imagining it roughly this time of year, thinking about next year. What does 2016 look like for me, and trying to make an estimate essentially about what kind of PTO hours I'm going to have and how many of those I might want to cash out. And in March, I get into a car accident. I'm laid up. I have to use a ton of PTO and or sick leave. I think it's very difficult to expect an employee to make a prediction ahead about what the next year's going to look like. I think I understand what the legal issue is, and I don't want to put the county in jeopardy of going up against the IRS, even though we don't have a decision from them yet. But to me, it feels like we're putting a lot of pressure on employees who are already, I think, struggling to some extent to figure out how all this works to begin with. So I recognize we may, kind of echoing what Supervisor Schachner said, we may sort of have to do this given what we're up against, but it doesn't feel like a real good option for the employee from my perspective.
Any other discussion? Questions? Does everybody understand? We have a motion, a second, and it's amended, and they understand the amendments that has been made to it. With the December went to July and prorated 24 hours, so went to the 24 hours behind. Supervisor Nelson.
The last point I want to make about this, I hope maybe in the future, once we get the IRS decision, that maybe we can address this problem. Basically, you're telling me right now, I am not going to vote for this on the premise I think it's still kind of backwards. But if it's a stopgap measure to make sure for next year or so that we can fix this, because if I'm on this county board in 2 or 3 years and we're still meddling with it, then I won't be so hot to support it. But I'll support it now, as long as it's a stopgap measure. But I tell you, once we get the IRS rulings, I think we should look at it really hard, because I still think it's kind of backwards.
Any other discussion?
I would just say, as a member of the administration committee, that along with legal counsel, we will be reconsidering this at the appropriate time once there's some information, if different from the IRS. So I think you can count on us.
Any more discussion? Questions? If not, everybody understands the resolution is an amendment. And I explained that, so does everybody understand that? Okay, we'll vote. That was all yeses. Thank you. And we're down to our last resolution, and the resolution authorizing the borrowing of not to exceed $5 million and providing for an issuance of sales of general obligation bond therefore. And I'll need a motion in a second. You understand on this one now, it takes a 3/4 vote, so it takes a minute. Motion by Schottner, second by Supervisor Schoberg. And we'll have discussion. Supervisor Novotny.
I'm concerned about what the implications will be on the interest rate that we get on that loan and the loan for the health center.
Yeah.
If we tack on an additional $5 million.
Okay, Supervisor Schoberg.
Perhaps a solution could be, and this would be an amendment to the resolution, that while it takes a 3/4 vote to authorize the bond, which I would vote in favor of today, I would amend the motion or the resolution so that the actual issuance of the bonds does not occur until 2017. That way, I believe when I spoke with County Administrator, we still stay bankable for 2016. We save $500,000 on the nursing home bonds. We save $85,000 on the extra $5 million, but it's all authorized today. And if I understand it correctly, we have up to 5 years after authorization to actually issue and sell those bonds. So that way those of us who are concerned about the funding for the nursing home disappearing, that no longer is going to be an issue that depends on a 3/4 later vote. We're deciding that today. We're banking that today. But we could also save a lot of taxpayer interest by not issuing the second series of the bonds until 2017. And so the resolution at line 21, and Council, you're going to have to look at this rather quickly. The resolution at line 21, I would just insert right after the caption the words, during the calendar year 2017. That's when the county finance director shall cause the notice of sale, etc. So that way we're purposefully delaying the issuance of this now to be authorized additional $5 million. And hopefully your concern, Howard, is addressed. So that's a motion to amend if council would say that's permissible.
Do I have a second to that amendment? Supervisor Novotny, second.
Just to clarify the motion itself, are you saying on line 21, after the sales of the bonds, insert during the calendar year of 2017? and then the rest of it. Okay.
Online, can you repeat that, Supervisor Schober?
Yeah, line 21 of the resolution itself, there's not a reference as to when the sale of the bonds would occur, and I would be adding this clause saying during the calendar year 2017, comma, the county finance director.
Supervisor Nelson?
My only caveat with this is that with these bond resolutions, they are not prepared by our office. They are prepared by bond counsel who especially drafts these. I don't particularly see an issue with it, but I suppose if bond counsel does, it could be revisited next month.
Supervisor Nelson?
Which bonds are we talking about? Are you talking the nursing home and the CIP bonding, or, because I want to keep them separate. I want the nursing home to be standalone.
I believe the nursing home, I'll just say.
They are
the nursing home
separate.
is standing alone at the 10 million. This is an additional bond for capital improvements. And the nursing home, we've still approved that one, so that one will probably come up, I'm not sure, probably February. And that'll be, we've already approved that 3/4 vote on that, so then your vote at that time would be just to move forward and take it out for bonding and for purchasing.
So we're staying separate. The 10 million with the nursing home in February, the 5 million wouldn't be until 2017?
That's per Supervisor Schoberg's amendment.
For the 5 million. Okay. The one question, may I discuss about the resolution, or am I out of order? The amendment. I would support that as long as the nursing home and the CIP stay apart.
Supervisor Rang?
Could I just understand, I'd like to understand the implications more. So the identified capital improvements that we're talking about, this would allow us to make expenditures, and then when we did issue the bond, it could repay us, or we could use that to finance the improvements that we make. We're not proposing to wait for the improvements until 2017, are we?
Well, Chair, Vice Chair, Supervisors, we don't have funds to pay for all of the identified capital improvements for 2016. So yes, it would put much of what's on the capital improvement plan on hold for a year. I had provided an analysis at one time estimating at the end of 16 our unassigned fund balance would probably have about $3 million in excess of the 35% that we've treated as our required fund balance. So so no, we don't have enough funds to pay for the capital improvements without doing this bonding. Now maybe to explain, there's really kind of two issues that we're looking at. One is, do we, in this resolution, authorize the sale of the $5 million of capital improvement bonds? And now the board still has, would have to vote on a sale of those bonds. So you're not losing control of anything at this point. You could pass the resolution as it was presented, and if it's the board's prerogative to decide not to approve any sale of bonds. we still have the issue of how are we going to pay for capital improvements during 2016. And then, so the second issue, and it's kind of discussed in the memo, is given passage of the authorizing resolution, then we have to start dealing with how are we going to time the sale of two different sets of bonds. And that's a kind of a separate matter.
Supervisor Motley?
Wouldn't this be following the scenario number 2, where we take the $10 million and take half of it and apply it to the capital improvements, apply half of it to the nursing home, and then the following year take the $5 million and apply it to the balance of the nursing home costs?
If I could speak to that, that was my intention, the finesse move, if you would, that the big risk that I think we all appreciated was not, a year from now, not having, let's say that we did go ahead and use half of the nursing home bond for 2016 for the capital improvement, and we didn't have the authorization for the additional $5 million for the last installment to the nursing home, and that would take another 3/4 vote down the road. That wasn't a risk that many of us were willing to take. This, however, as envisioned in this, if you will, finesse authorization, is that it gets the authority of the bonds out there, and then internally, the time that we sell the bonds, we can say, well, $5 million will be used for the nursing home construction costs in 2016, $5 million for all of the capital improvements, and we already have the 3/4 vote to approve the remaining amount for the nursing home in 2017. So we've gotten over the highest hurdle, which is the 3/4 vote, assuming 3/4 of you agree. We've gotten over that hurdle, and the remaining hurdle will just be in 2017, when there may be a different makeup of the board, but hopefully still a majority would want to complete the funding. Maybe not 3/4, but it's still a majority. And when I ran this by Sandy, she did not get overly concerned about depending on a majority vote either.
Minister Thompson?
Thank you. That scenario that has just been very, very well laid out was the original, one of the original recommendations coming forward from Mr. Middet. And I discussed this at budget time when we approved the budget, but I was getting some heartburn from some board members that by doing it that way, we would potentially jeopardize the majority vote for the sale of the remaining $5 million. But the way that Supervisor Schoberg explained how this would, roll out was what was originally being discussed as the recommendation from the finance director as to how best fund capital improvement projects along with the nursing home. But so that's certainly an option. I think that this would still allow for that. But you're going to have a majority vote in 2017 for the remaining $5 million. No, you already have the 3/4 vote, the authorizing resolution, and it's good for 5 years. Right. You need a majority vote when the actual sale of the bonds occur.
That's a problem. Supervisor Schotter.
So I need some clarification with the amendment. As far as finance and legal is concerned, if we go forward with the amendment, would we be, how can I put it? These projects can't be on the list for the bond resolution if we put the limit for the bond for these projects. Is that a potential problem? Because from my understanding, the bonds, you gotta list what they're specifically for. And
Correct.
with the amendment as presented, these items cannot be on the bonds until 2017.
At this point, we have an existing authorizing resolution for health center expenditures.
Yep.
We cannot sell those bonds and borrow the proceeds of them for capital improvements. Those need to be used for purposes of the health center.
And
if the authorizing resolution for the capital improvement bonds is delayed until 2017, then that's it as far as spending, other than for our ability to take it out of excess unassigned fund balance.
and then my second question is, I guess it's not really a question as much as a statement. What is limiting us from just following with, okay, we're going to do 5 million in bonding for the nursing home, and then bring forward, if this passes, it would be, what I've envisioned was, we'll do 5 million for the nursing home, have a specific bond for that, and then a 5 million for capital improvement, have a specific bond for that, and then the third bonding in 2017. So that way, we would be addressing, we're not taking from any one project or anything, but specific bonds are going directly where they're needed, and they're not blending the issue. So I guess because of that view, I really can't support the amendment, because I actually think we can't hold off on going with these projects. So.
Supervisor Nelson.
Supervisor Shockner, you're putting a lot of trust in future boards. Things change, and there's contingent out there who would like to change anything they can. I looked at this, and I went over this pretty good last night. The CIP, we've had projects in the CIP program. The one that always sticks out to me is we got to finish phase 2. It's mandated. You know what I mean? It's mandated for this county that we provide services that way. We need to do that. I am very uneasy and very uncomfortable putting the nursing home in with a bonding and people saying, trust me, they'll vote for it down the road. We've had other things that have happened in the past that have made things kind of like we had to chase a little bit. So I'm not good with that position. I think the CIP needs to be on its own. I don't think it needs to be tied into the nursing home. Because I tell you, in April when I run for re-election, it's not going to be a referendum again on the nursing home. Nursing home is standalone. CIP is projects that we should be budgeting for along the road. There's a lot of things in here that are really nice that we could do. And believe me, I'm progressive as anybody about making sure we have good stuff for the employees. But we have to realize, too, that we can't extend ourselves so far.
Supervisor Osnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Pat stated earlier, you had talked to some supervisors that had heartburn. I think it's safe to say, Mr. Chair, you and I had a long conversation with both Pat and Bob, and we had major heartburn. We passed a resolution earlier for the 20 million, is that correct? For the nursing home.
That's correct.
And as part of that, we also said that we were going to divide the 20 million into two $10 million bonding issues, strictly for the nursing home. So that money's already been designated for the nursing home.
Yes,
And
that's correct.
that's correct, right? So
Authorizing
once we're getting another resolution for $5 million, why are we going against what we've already set? We made the policy. Now you want to take $5 million away from the nursing home for capital improvement plans. Hold on. My question is, what happens to our rating if we include the 5 million with the 10 million in bond for 15? how much more will that cost the county? We can't get bank, we'll lose our bank interest on that, right?
The bonds would no longer be, we'd no longer be considered a small issuer for that year. So the bonds that we would sell would not be bank qualified, which means that banks could not buy them. They'd have to be sold in a larger market with a consortium of bond underwriters. So, and that's what would result in slightly higher interest costs.
So are we looking at the 800 million in part of the fiscal? What?
There was.
Is the 800,000 as part of the fiscal impact statement that you got on here, is that an estimate that's going to cost us 800,000 more than it normally would if we go with two separate bonding issues?
The Springstead recommendation or estimate was actually 585,000, 500,000 on the health center bonds, and an additional 85,000 on the capital improvement bonds.
And so what is the 800,000 figure for then?
That was
understand
an earlier estimate that fell in here.
Point of order, we're supposed to be speaking to the issue of the amendment.
I think this is part of the amendment. If we're going to move it off.
Question, Chair.
Supervisor Berkey.
With respect to the amendment, a question that I have, Supervisor Nelson has recommended one of the items in the CIP as being on the top. Is it possible to have this go back to committees to review and decide what can wait until 2017 and what cannot? And can the fund balance be used toward, for instance, phase 2?
The fund balance could be used. We could set up a reimbursing resolution as we've done in the past. One thing I would caution about is in terms of the health center, we still have some additional funding beyond the 20 million. We have the geothermal that was originally estimated at 670,000, and we have some other items that are going to go beyond that. What the capital improvement plan has proposed in terms of funding that was to use a loan from the general fund, if you will, to the health center. The geothermal has an estimated payback period in terms of cost savings. The therapy pool would spin off its own set of revenues. And for those items where we actually have a cash flow that's available, then we could use that to reimburse the general fund. So when I spoke about having about $3 million of excess, I don't like that term, but excess unassigned fund balance, probably $1 million of that would be used for funding the rest of the health center on a loan basis. So now we're down to about $2 million. So we do have that, but we don't have an awful lot. And that takes us down to an area that, I guess I've expressed my concerns about using the fund balance and putting it at risk. Chief among those concerns are because of levy limits, we have a very constrained ability to build that fund balance back up. Once we spend it, it's going to be very difficult to replenish it. And that's my hesitation.
Supervisor Peterson.
Also on that fund balance, if we get that too low, our bond rating is also going to go down, is it not? Then we're going to lose in the end. We'll have a higher interest rate charged to us.
Yes.
Yes.
It would impact the, it's viewed as security to the bondholders, and it would drive the rating down, resulting in driving the interest rates up.
Supervisor Hanson, are we talking about the amendment part of this now?
That's what I was going to say. Thank you, Roger.
Go ahead.
I was going to speak to the ending of the conversation regarding fund
Well, I
balance.
think we'll stick to the amendment part.
That's right.
We'll get back to that issue, and then we'll come back to other questions when we get back to the resolution. Supervisor Ring?
Well, I have a question of clarification, and I think it does relate to understanding the implications of the amendment. And so I need to understand this, because I'm not sure that I do. We have a resolution authorizing borrowing of $5 million today, and that we have 5 years then to sell the bonds related to that.
That's correct.
Okay, and then we may, I believe, or whenever we did the last resolution authorizing the borrowing of $20 million, we did that last year, and we have 5 years to do that. So why can't we, could we sell $5 million? So go ahead with this resolution, and rather than sell 10, could we sell the remaining 10 on the nursing home in two $5 million pieces, and then sell this as one $5 million? What are the implications of that? Because I don't know that we can, and also push, so a question I have too, do we have the authorization to, is this forcing a future board to do something, or they would just have to take action?
I get your question, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the limit is $10 million in one calendar year. So,
Yes.
correct? So
Correct.
the plan right now, as it stands, and that could be changed, but the plan as it stands now is to bring forward the sale resolution of $10 million of bonding for the health center in February of 2016. So there's 10. So you're at your limit already. So if you,
So if we do 2, 5 and 5, and then let's do the nursing home final 5 and 17. Is that too late?
it's not too late, but it causes some consternation and heartburn. It's a board decision.
And the consternation is what?
Because of the fact that you might have a different looking board in 2017.
Oh, yes, back to that. Okay.
Just wait a minute.
Thank you.
Supervisor Peavy?
Yeah, I support Supervisor Solberg's amendment, because I see this as a cash flow issue. And to borrow this money in 17 and to prioritize the list of capital improvements and take excess funds out of the reserve funds for at least the 911 phase 2 for 2016, and then we'll do the other issues in 2017. I don't want to be looking here, and may not be me, with a different board and have to authorize this. So I think this is a perfect way to solve all the problems. Yeah, we won't fund everything in 2016 we'd like to, but the money will be there and authorized in 2017. So I think this is a good way to go. Thank you.
Supervisor Schoberg?
It delays the project.
I started this mess. I had good intentions, but I think I heard Bob say that my amendment to require that the bonds not be sold till 2017 is not necessary, that we can always decide not to sell more than $10 million of bonds in 2016. We can always decide, let's limit it to that. So then my question is, it's not the amount that's authorized, it's the amount that's sold that has the $10 million limit attached, right? It's the year of issuance. So we're okay having $15 million authorized for 2016, and we don't have to have this phrase about during 2017, that remaining 5 million can be spent. We can decide as a board when to actually issue those shares.
Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
So then backing up for simple purposes here, my amendment really is not necessary, because it takes another majority vote to issue them anyway.
Correct.
Right.
Just to back up, last May, the authorizing resolution for the health center bonds was for 20 million.
Yeah.
That didn't jeopardize our bank qualification. It was only based on how much we chose to sell.
Then I'd like to wrap up further discussion on the amendment, knowing that I'm going to be voting against, or maybe I should abstain. Or can I withdraw I don't know. It seems to be not necessary.
Wait a minute. Supervisor Schober, you're withdrawing your amendment? Is that what I heard you say?
With the board's forgiveness.
Then I asked the question, if it's okay, it's the board to withdraw it, right?
Does anyone from the board object?
Does anybody from the board object to that, withdrawing that amendment to go to 2017? If there isn't, okay, Supervisor Novotny, you have a question. We're
No
back to the-
objection, no objection. But my question is, how do we cover the cost on the capital improvement?
Now we're back to the main motion.
Now we're back to the main motion.
And
Second. So we're back.
all of our discussions are
Yes.
relevant to the main
Right.
motion. And we're talking about heartburn. And I have a lot more heartburn over a 3/4 vote than I do over a majority vote. You know, quite frankly, if this board changed so much that a majority would not approve the 5 million, that same majority might decide to sell the whole thing. All right? So if we can't ride on the basis that a majority is going to stay with the nursing home, then we're all at risk anyway. So the funding for the capital improvements is, as Supervisor Ring was pointing out, we have 15 million authorized. We only sell 10 million. We stay bankable for that full 10. We don't need more than 5 for the nursing home next year. And then in 2017, with not all of us in agreement, we then rely upon the future board majority vote, not a 3/4 vote, approving the final issuance of those remaining bonds. So I guess I'm in favor of the motion as is.
Yes, Supervisor Schottner, and we'll come back. I'll be back in a minute. Go ahead.
I guess when talking towards the main motion now and towards the bonding that we have currently, I guess if my look at it is this: if we're really concerned about majorities and how the board's going to change out in the future, then what you really should be proposing is that we just take out the full 15 and pay for the capital improvements and pay for everything. So, but that is not the fiscally responsible thing to do, because then you're putting more debt on the county to make sure that the projects are done. So I think moving forward, I think the smarter thing to do is, if you want to keep them separate, do a 5 million bond sale for the nursing home, do a 5 million bond sale for the capital improvements, and then next year finish off the nursing home. Because regardless, if everyone on the board currently got voted out, if the next board is not willing to pay their debt, that's on them. If they're going to choose to ruin this county's rating by refusing to take out and pay for its own debt, that's on them. And that's on the people who elected them into office. Because they're voting to not pay people who completed a project. And that's my view. I'm not worried about that.
Supervisor Novotny.
I agree with Supervisor Schottner, but I've got a question for Mr. Midditt. We authorized $20 million for the nursing home. Can we split that, or are we committed to $10 million for the second year?
No, we're not committed. The resolution reads something to the effect of it's authorized to be sold in one or more bond issues.
Okay, so then what Supervisor Schachner proposed is possible with what we approved in May. In other words, splitting the final 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Supervisor Keesler.
Just to kind of summarize, I think this discussion, while good, is a little premature. And it's premature because it's not until February that we have to list on that $10 million issuance what we're going to be bonding for. All we're doing today is saying that we want to authorize, with a 3/4 vote, $5 million of bonding. At some point in the future, we will then issue those bonds, and when we do issue those bonds, we will then state what those are for. So simply, I mean, there's a lot of discussion here today, but basically, this will have to take place again in February when we issue the 10 million and say, what is that 10 million for? Is it all for the nursing home, or is it going to be 5 million for the nursing home, 5 million for capital improvement? And then we will have still another resolution, presumably that we pass, for another 5 million that we will have another discussion about some point in the future on what that's going to be spent for. Presumably the nursing home or capital improvement, whichever we don't spend for in February. Did that go off? Now you broke yours. Anyway, so with that, I suggest we wrap this up and just simply decide, do we want to issue another 5 million at some point within the next 5 years? That's what we're talking about. Thank you.
Supervisor Peterson.
I support this resolution for the fact that it gives our staff tools to work with, and I would not want to see us backed into a corner. I'd rather err on the side of leaving it open for them to have some tools to work with. Thank you.
Supervisor Rang.
I have a question about what other sources other than bonding we looked at. I understand you did look at the Wisconsin State Trust Fund loan. Is there a reason we're not looking at that as an alternative?
I looked at that about a year ago, as I recall, and there was, at that time, I don't believe that the debt service on that state trust fund is outside of levy limits. So that would have to be paid back with operating levy dollars, which is, once again, kind of constraining.
Supervisor Nelson.
As far as I can see, 5.7 million. I'll say this, I'm all for fixing everything, infrastructure, but we don't even know what we need. Go ahead and do 5 million. When the priority is the 2 million, and we don't even know what the end number is either for the 911 infrastructure. And I think, I'm kind of feeling that someone's pretty well hell-bent to get the numbers separated and get that nursing home to sit on a later agenda. I'm all for the CIP and doing the 5 million bonding as standalone, not tied in with the nursing home. But then again, we don't even know what the final numbers are. We might not even be close to 5 million. We might be at 2.5. Because some of these things can maybe wait until 2017. Plus, I have a question of Minister Thompson. What do we have scheduled money-wise for this year in the budget that might be in this, that are part of our this year's CIP that we've voted on in the last budget, this budget last month? Are there projects on here that are in the capital improvement for 2016?
Yeah, those projects are all in the capital improvement plan. They were presented as proposed for funding through bonding. There are, in the operating budget, you approved five projects in there that are paid for out of operating levy. And those were because the nature of those projects, which was the thin client replacement for $25,000. We had some facilities equipment, and as well as squad cars and unmarked vehicles. Squad cars don't qualify for bond financing because we generally replace them in 3 years, which is too short of a life to be financing with 10-year bonds. And the unmarked vehicles are all leased, so, and we're not going to use bond proceeds for lease payments. So those items that were in the capital improvement plan will be paid for out of levy dollars. Everything else, and what's on that list, is what was proposed in the capital improvement plan for bond financing.
At this time, we have a motion and a second on the floor for this resolution authorizing the borrowing of not to exceed $5 million. Supervisor Avery.
On line 34, where it talks about section 4, can someone explain that to me? I'm just not understanding what that all means.
What? Well, my response is it makes sense to Supervisor Schoberg. It's basically saying that if there's any rules that are inconsistent with this that the board has previously adopted, they're rescinded if they conflict with this. It's kind of a standard clause. So that's one of the things. And the rest of the clause involves a concept called severability, in which that if any provision of this resolution is deemed to be invalid, only that provision is deemed invalid and the rest survives. Another kind of standard thing in a resolution or a contract. And then the rest of the language means that it takes effect by adoption, just as it says, and approval, which is the 3/4 vote as provided in law.
So it doesn't change any resolution that we've done in the past on the prior bonding?
No, only so far as, and I don't believe there's anything in conflict, and it doesn't change anything. But if there was some rule that we're unaware of that the board adopted 10 years ago that would somehow prohibit this, and I can't imagine that there would be, that is repealed.
I'll get back. Thank you. I'll get back again. This resolution is not amended. It says voted. We had a motion and a second on it. It's not amended. What? And the resolution authorizing the borrowing of not to exceed $5 million and providing for the issuance of sale of general obligation bond therefore. Now, we've had a lot of discussion, so I don't see anything else. It's time to vote. I don't have a problem with it. The motion failed.
Fails.
What?
This is a 3/4 vote, right?
Take
Yes.
a 3/4 vote, so the motion failed.
Motion fails. It requires 15 affirmative votes.
Right, and we didn't get that, so that failed. So the resolution fails. So we'll have to take that up at a later date or whenever. So that's where we're at on that. This time, I will ask for any future agenda items. Supervisor Hanson.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask that we add to the agenda for our next meeting, or consider preparing for the next meeting, a referendum that would go out to the entire citizenry of St. Croix County in opposition to the case law known as Citizens United. This would give the chance for our population to actually speak against the gross amount of money which is in politics. I think it's something the administration committee might be willing to pick up.
I didn't understand that.
It's,
Yep.
yeah, we
We'll
can
have to
take
refer
that.
that to admin, so that'll take care of that. Any other resolutions or any other agenda items anybody has? No other ones? You have one? Yeah. Go ahead, Supervisor Ring.
I don't have an agenda item, but an announcement. On your chairs was an invitation to the 7th Annual Legislative Forum. That's next Tuesday, December 8th. It's sponsored by the Economic Development Corporation, and we have 6 legislators invited. And it's a good opportunity to get your questions answered, so we encourage you and your constituents to come. It's very informal. You get to ask any question that you would like. Thanks.
Okay. No other agenda items? Then I'll move on to the county clerk's report correspondence.
I have no correspondence to report on. I just want to remind you that candidate packets are available. You can also get them online. I have some available here. Deadline to file is January 5th, 2016. First day to circulate nomination papers is today, December 1st. If you will intend not to seek reelection, the filing deadline for non-candidacy is December 28th at 5 p.m. If you do not file that paper, there's a 72-hour extension for a filing deadline for anybody in that district. There's also some calendars available that were distributed by Cedar Corporation and WCA for you to take if you'd like, and that's all I have.
Okay. Any other announcements? You have one, Supervisor Osmus?
I would just like to wish the supervisors, staff, and all our county employees happy holidays, a happy new year, and drive safe, please. Thank you.
And I would say everybody be diligent of all the people on the, as far as our plow trucks and our sheriff's department out there when they have their lights on. Be careful. They're out there standing, protecting us and doing their job, so be very careful so the holidays are good for everyone. Thank you, everyone. The meeting's adjourned.